Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm, and you are watching first part of What If Kid Naruto Left the Village with Itachi. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now, wasting no more time, let's start the story.
A little boy, breathing heavily, ran through the empty streets. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, mixing with the mud that was smeared on his face as he ran from an unknown danger. Additionally, blood from different wounds and abrasions combined with the material to form an unpalatable mixture. A barely perceptible trail was left behind as it trickled from his chin. Nearly. He skidded to a halt behind a big pile of stock crates after ducking into a small alleyway. Hoping they wouldn't find him here, he dropped to his knees and gave them a tight hug. Before they got close to his secret location, he waited in silence, fighting to keep his ragged breathing under control. His suspicions were confirmed a short while later. Footsteps roared past the alley's entrance, the torch's flickering light shining dimly against the shadows. Furious that his target was gone, a rough voice spat, "Where is he, the little freak?" Another voice said, "The trail ends here." The kid winced. There was evidence of him. Evidence that might take them to his current location. An unidentified figure entered the dim doorway and said, "Maybe he ran down here, hid behind one of the trash cans." The boy stiffened, ready to run again. "Hold on, I think I see him," a distant female voice called. "Come on everyone," yelled the pro. "Leader." A man shouted, deaf to the demon, and was met with a chorus of war cries and agreements. The child was left to mope in his misery as the commotion soon subsided into the night. From everywhere, a voice whispered, "They do not understand your worth." The boy's head jerked up and he looked around the room frantically, trying to find the owner of the voice and perhaps his next assailant. The figure repeated, appearing closer now, "They only fear what you cannot and could not control." Whimpering, the child squeezed his body into the smallest possible target and prepared for the blow. "Don't worry, I don't intend to hurt you," the man's voice cried. A teenage boy emerged from the darkness, his shoulder-length raven hair pulled back into a tiny ponytail. The Anbu uniform he was wearing was covered in blood splatters, and there was a long scratch through the symbol on the Leaf Shinobi handband. Who are you?" With a soft smile, the fair-haired boy stuttered in question, his eyes wide, his defensive posture unwavering. "You can call me Itachi Uchiha. You already show signs of great talent, and you will become something of greatness, with proper training." Itachi went on. "I have been watching you for some time now, and I can defiantly say you have some promise." The boy simply watched in cautious confusion, not understanding what the seemingly amiable teen was getting at. "I would like to know if you detest the treatment you have received from these blind villagers?" the Uchiha prodigy inquired. The child nodded without even considering his answer, gradually releasing his protective posture. He replied simply and quietly, "That's why I want to be Hokage." Itachi nodded sympathetically. "Oh, but you'll need to become even more in order to alter these villagers' perceptions." "A myth," Itachi clarified. The boy repeated, thinking about this, "A legend. I'll teach you everything I know if you accompany me. I'll turn you into the best ninja in history, better than all the Hokages put together. The legend in children's bedtime tales, you will be the greatest." Itachi said, "All you have to do is leave this village with me." He looked up at the Uchiha, his gaze hard and strong, one of a great ninja in the making. The boy bowed his head in, though, the spiky blonde strands falling over his eyes. Could he really leave the village hidden in the leaves? With someone he'd only met moments before? Could he really trust this Itachi? Of course he wanted to become great, it was his lifelong dream, and he'd do anything to make that ambition come true, even if it meant dying. Itachi smirked as the boy, standing from his corner with his sapphire eyes glinting boldly, responded firmly, "I will follow you anywhere, if that means my dream will be realized." Then, Naruto Uzumaki, accompany me. We start today. The legend is born today. And that October 10th night, an Anbu captain and a young child disappeared into the night in the outside world without anyone noticing. After 8 years. "Are you happy to be returning?" The boy beside him grinned, his blonde hair blowing in the light wind, and a man with raven hair, his face shaded by the casa atop his head, asked. He responded, ecstatic, his tone was deep with sarcasm. Naruto had changed significantly in the 8 years he had been traveling. He was wearing black capris that hung just below his knees, a dark orange shirt underneath a black jacket that was half unzipped, and a necklace made up of 3 red tones. Almost exactly like the Sharingan. He had grown to a height of 5 feet, and his blonde hair, which had only been cut a few times in the previous 2 years, had only a few spiky ends just above his eyebrows. A single sword, securely strapped to his back, was sheathed in a case of firm leather. Itachi, looking at his student next to him, said, "Naruto, now that I have trained you, and giving you the knowledge and skills to become the greatest legend of all, there is something I want you to give me in return." Naruto nodded. He replied simply and softly, "Anything for you, Master Itachi." Itachi grinned. It was a very good thing that the boy would do anything to please him. "All right, my goals are clear. I want to destroy Konoha." Itachi, who was closely monitoring the boy's reaction, added, "And I need you to do it, from the inside." Naruto simply shrugged. "No issue. Any specifics?" he said. Itachi nodded. It wasn't too difficult. "I still need to work out a few alliances. I will inform you shortly." The Uchiha said, "Just keep your radio with you at all times." Naruto nodded once more in comprehension as the gates quickly approached, casting long shadows on the ground to indicate that it was now almost noon. "Now, this is where I take my leave," Naruto said. "You were assumed dead, but I am a disbanded ninja. You will be placed in their class because you will be working undercover as a genin here." As Itachi turned to go, Naruto bowed with his eyes closed in respect and said, "And whatever you do, don't show them everything you know." He rolled his eyes and said, "Yes, master." He watched as his friend and former sensei disappeared into the darkness, and now he would be taught by one of the Leaf Village's weak, pitiful ninja. He whirled around on his heel, the movement like a fluid dance because he was so adept at moving now, and he strode through the gates, right past the guard booth, without even stopping. The blonde turned just enough for the guard to see his face and kept walking away when one of the guards, Genma, called after him, "Excuse me, I need to see your pass." The Chunin was instantly silent, his jaw dropping. "What? Genma, what is it?" Kotetsu was perplexed as to why the man had become so rigid due to the single intruder. "Naruto Uzumaki is that. Those scars look like whiskers, and I could identify them anywhere." Kotetsu's eyes widened as Genma stammered, his face turning white. "He passed away 8 years ago, right?" Genma shook his head in denial as the bandaged shinobi asked, gazing after the boys retreating back. "No, he vanished. However, after nearly a year passed with no answer, Hokage Sama reluctantly closed the case and declared him dead." The man who chewed senbon said, "You know he always had a heart for that boy, although no one could ever figure out why." "He's back, then, we have to call the Hokage," Kotetsu exclaimed, leaping to his feet in shock. He continued, looking around for a patrol. "Stop worrying, Kotetsu. The boy is probably already en route there. He will want to go straight to the academy, even though he will be far behind." Genma grabbed his partner by the arm and said, "I'm not sure if he'll even be able to pass with this year's class." The other Chunin sighed. "Yes, you're correct. Without Iruka's instruction, he will never be able to pass that test." Kotetsu responded, laughing a little, and with only 1 day to go, the poor boys got no hope. They had no idea that one of Konoha's most dangerous villains was smirking subtly while hiding in a tree that overlooked the guard's station. "You have no idea that Naruto can and will surpass you all, and your cherished village will collapse as a result." "I'm getting too old for this," Hokage said, bending over his slowly dwindling stack of papers, stamping his approval on one before turning to the next with a heavy sigh. "I think my back will be in this scrunched over position forever after the day I retire." His thoughts were jolted back to reality by a steady knocking. He commanded, his voice a little raspy from lack of use, "Come in." He looked up to see the ninja who needed his help, and the boy he thought he had lost, the little blonde Jinchuriki who had vanished so long ago, the Yondaimi's last and final wish. Though the little child he remembered had changed significantly. He nearly jumped out of his chair in surprise when he saw who was standing there. The Hokage grinned broadly and crinkled the wrinkles around his eyes as he said, "Naruto, what a surprise." The boy did not react to the gesture. Instead, he merely stood in the doorway, his face expressionless. He simply said, "I've come to you on a request." He approached the chair in the middle of the room and leaned back silently. The Sandaime was obviously shocked by the boy's cold demeanor. He had always been a cheerful, kind child, but after nearly 10 years away, a lot had changed, not necessarily positive changes. "Yes, Naruto, tell me about it," he answered, resting his chin on his hands and resting his elbows on the wooden desk. The cerulean-eyed boy confirmed, his body rigid and robotic, as though he had been trained to stay perfectly still. "I want to enroll in the academy, to become a registered genin of the Konoha shinobi." The child had struggled to stay still for 8 years. He would shift or fidget in his seat almost constantly, his eyes darting around the room as if seeking an escape route. The Hokage shook himself out of his thoughts. He needed to stop dwelling on the past so much. This was now, and this Naruto was real. I think that's a great idea, Naruto, but you're far too old to be in the introductory classes. I mean, there. Twice in one visit, Naruto added, I want to be put into the graduating class of this year. The old man responded in shock. Naruto. That isn't possible at all. You must have received some training during your absence, but you would be far too far behind to simply enroll in the class right now. Tomorrow is the graduation exam day. Naruto's frown deepened as he sputtered, there's absolutely no way you'd make it, not with the disadvantage you're at. He was shocked that he would want to skip so far ahead, but at least that trait had stayed with him all this time. With his arms crossed tightly across his chest, Naruto said, I can assure you, my skills are more than enough to pass your tests. The third Hokage clenched his jaw, lost in thought, and after a few moments of silence, he reached the bottom of the pile of filed papers and pulled out a rather large file. Information about every academy student who will be taking the tests tomorrow is contained in this file. Even though I think you will be at a very high disadvantage, I will send you to Iruka because there is only one spot left in this class. You will carry a message from me stating that I accept your application and give you complete authorization to take the graduation exams tomorrow. The blonde in front of him nodded and stood up in a fluid lime motion. The Hokage quickly wrote the note to the scarred Chunin and gave it to the newest member of the graduating class. Lucky for you, it's review day, so at least you'll have 24 hours to cram. The Sandaime said, a small smile that had faded with age, and then abruptly disappeared, replaced by a gentle smile. Naruto, the returned Jinchuriki, vanished into thin air. Oh, Naruto. Seeing what you have learned from this successful instructor of yours will be fascinating. The first great ninja war began and ended in this manner. As the lunch bell rang, a Chunin, who had a scar across the bridge of his nose, likely from a battle long ago, said to his class, now, this was beginning of the year material, so if anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to ask. His class of 19 students squabbled and fought, trying to be the first out the door, and he sighed. Even after 6 years, they continued to act like children. These kids were a different bunch, but they certainly had their share of troublemakers. If they would just take it seriously once in a while, they would all be great ninjas. He always loved these hours of silence because it allowed him to gather himself, concentrate on the next lesson, and ultimately keep his students' attention. The Chunin was distracted from his thoughts when the sliding door silently opened and a blond boy, who appeared to be around 12 or 13, entered the room with his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. Iruka examined him and noted some of his peculiar features, such as the fact that he had whisker-like scars on both cheeks, which he could only recall from one person, and that boy had vanished 8 years prior. Could it be? Iruka's eyes widened as the boy slid a piece of paper across the desk to the staring teacher, looking around him in boredom and quickly analyzing the message. Iruka, the boy in front of you is none other than Naruto Uzumaki, the long-lost child, who came to my office just minutes ago to ask to be included in this year's graduating class. I have decided to give him a fair chance even though I have serious doubts that he will pass the exams because he only has one day to learn all the material he needs to know. It is evident that the child has received some training from someone, but I am not sure if it will be sufficient at this time. I suppose we'll find out tomorrow. The Sandaime the Chunin took a closer look this time and saw that he had changed a lot since he had last seen him, and to say that Iruka was shocked would be an understatement. Here was the Yondaime's last wish, brought back from the dead, wanting to dive straight into the village's ninja forces. Iruka said, well then Naruto, there's only about a few more minutes of lunch break, so you can take a seat anywhere you like. The blonde nodded and slid into a seat in the front row without making a sound. He put his feet on his desk and rested his back on the desk behind him, then rocked back and forth slowly while he waited for his class to resume. Hi, Sasuke-kun. This time, you're going to sit next to me? He looked at her and rolled his eyes. These girls never give him a break. A pink-haired girl cooed, running up to a dark-haired boy's side, bouncing up and down. The girl wilted and struck out again, but just as it appeared that he would escape, his other number one fan suddenly tackled him. No, he said grimly, quickening his pace, trying to escape the bother at his side. Sasuke-kun, a long-haired blonde shouted, encircling him with a lung-crushing embrace from behind. The poor teen fought to break free, frantically trying to escape the inevitable explosion that would ensue. Ino pig, what are you doing to my Sasuke-kun? As she marched toward the pink-haired girl spat. Your Sasuke-kun, what were you saying? Dropping from the raven-haired boy's back to face her rival, she retorted, he's mine, forehead. New. He has fallen for me, cried the cherry blossom. Sakura, you're just crazy. Everyone is aware that he is in love with me, Ino screamed. The two girls spun around, anticipating a race to attack the delicious Uchiha, but they were disappointed to see him retreating several yards away. After exchanging one last glare, they started running, vying to see who could reach the prize first. A group of students pushed through the door, all attempting to enter simultaneously, and at once they all saw the blonde boy patiently waiting in the first row, his eyes closed and his hands behind his head, while a teenager with a dog on top of his head danced quietly over to where the boy was sleeping and signaled for everyone to calm down. He leaned down and reached out to tip the chair back, sending its passenger sprawling onto the floor. The child scurried backwards in shock as Naruto snarled, "Don't even think about it. I believed you to be asleep," he cried, and Naruto grinned a little. A dark-haired boy, a pink-haired girl, and a blonde girl tumbled into the room, landing in a tumbled heap on the floor with Sasuke at the bottom. "Not everything is always as it seems," he replied, watching disinterestedly as the other students filed in, taking their seats, and waiting for Iruka to return. "Tell her, Sasuke," the blonde one shouted, her long blonde hair pulled up in a high ponytail, ending just above the small of her back, her bangs smeared clumsily across his forehead from the fight, her light blue eyes blazing with rage and resolve. "No, you inform her." Naruto's eyes narrowed. "This is Itachi's little brother. Doesn't look like much." The other one screamed, glaring at the girl on top of her, whose light pink hair flowed to her shoulder blades and whose eyes were a subtle green, shining with the same expression as the blondie. The poor boy pinned underneath them had dark charcoal eyes, complemented by raven black hair. "Avoid me at all costs," Naruto sneered as Sasuke grunted and dragged himself out from under the group of fangirls. "Pathetic," he muttered, rolling his eyes at the scene, and Sasuke spun around, his eyes meeting Naruto's, one monotonous, the other full of disbelief. "What just did you say?" Not sure if he had heard correctly, Sasuke inquired. He didn't simply call Sasuke Uchiha weak. Naruto repeated, drawing little gasps from the room, "I said you're pathetic, feeble, weak." He could sense some of the girls scowling at him, but it didn't matter. It wasn't as if their opinions were important. "Newcomer, I'd exercise caution," Sasuke snarled. "I can kick your ass from here to Suna." "What makes you believe that I genuinely care?" Naruto answered, utterly disinterested in the entire circumstance. "Now I'm warning you." Sasuke was furious because the raven-haired teen, who usually didn't care what people thought, acted as though he knew he could beat him and called him weak. "I am at the top of the class, I could beat you down into the ground," he said. Naruto sneered and closed his eyes once more, saying, "Whatever." Sasuke had had enough. "All right, that's it. Outside, you, me. Now," he said solemnly, his eyes full of resolve. He replied, "Nah, I'll pass." Sasuke slammed his hands on the desk, making tiny fissures show beneath his clenched fists. That was not a proposal. Naruto sighed. At least it would be more enjoyable than just sitting here. That was a demand, Sasuke growled, already turning to leave. Field of training. Whispers rippled through the crowd of the impending battle as the class gathered around the sidelines, Sasuke on one end and Naruto on the other, both hands still in their pockets. Sasuke took a stance and muttered, "Fight for real." Naruto groaned. Sasuke growled. He was so going down. Naruto replied simply, "I don't think your fangirls would like if I killed you." He took a deep breath and put his fingers to his mouth, getting ready for one of his notorious moves. Kaden. Jutsu no Gukaku. Attack me. Sasuke snarled, his posture straight and poised, flawless in every way, while Naruto stood silently with his hands still in his pockets. Give it your all. With a smooth response, the blonde looked boredly at the barricade of girls and said, "I don't think your fangirls would appreciate if I killed you." While most of them were angry, believing that he could defeat Sasuke, a few simply watched with curiosity, not caring what happened to the Uchiha. They needed some excitement in this class, and the new kid was definitely causing it. "Sasuke, you can take him." Sakura stood next to her, her eyes wide, unable to sense any chakra from the blonde, not even a glimmer of power that every ninja held. It was strange for a shinobi to have no chakra at all. They were always born with a flare of the blue aura. Ino cried, pushing herself into the front line. Her eyes flickered to Naruto's face, and she faltered in her step for half a second, but she quickly covered that mistake as soon as it had appeared. They were going to cream him. Naruto sneered as Sasuke reassured him, breathing steadily, getting ready for the jutsu that would end the fight before it started. "I will beat you." Sasuke's eyes narrowed, His brow furrowed, and he said simply, "You couldn't beat me if I were dying on the floor." His tone was so confident that it was utterly believable. It was time to put an end to this waste of time. Kaden. Jutsu no Bukaku. The crowd's eyes widened. He hadn't even tried to move. Sasuke smirked. So much for his talk. But his smile vanished as he felt a presence behind him. Naruto didn't budge, not even an inch, as the flames engulfed his body, the burning inferno licking at the grass beneath his form, scorching a blackened circle in the field. Sasuke yelled, sucking in as much air as he could before exhaling out, a large stream of fire rocketing towards the blonde. "How did you manage to avoid that?" Sasuke, never one to be outdone, snarled. "We all saw you. It hit." Naruto shrugged and kicked at the grass in boredom. He replied, "I merely sidestepped." Sasuke's eyes widened in shock, as he had experienced more surprises today than he had since he began the academy. "Why? You could have avoided my strongest blow." Naruto scowled, his brows furrowing as Sasuke muttered, speaking more to himself than to the boy in front of him. "Best? Really? I hoped you were more than that. Uchiha, the prodigy, should be the best." The mere mention of that man made the Uchiha extremely angry, a new sense of power rising up, and he roared, leaping at the blonde, only to grab nothing but air. "Like your brother," Naruto said, striking Sasuke's weak point. Sasuke muttered, "Where'd you go, bastard?" He was nearly knocked off his feet by a hard jab from behind, but he regained his composure by spinning on his heel, still bent in half, and attempting to swipe at the bottom of Naruto's shins, hoping to knock him off balance. The Jinchuriki simply jumped in his place, avoiding the blow, and flipped backwards, landing 10 feet away from where Sasuke stood, panting. The Uchiha glared at the boy, making him look weak in front of his entire class. He gritted his teeth and clenched his fists, turning his knuckles white. Iruka took a step forward into the field, raising his hands in peace. "All right, Sasuke, excellent. Your jutsu is progressing quite nicely. Everyone, it's back to class," he shouted, hoping to break up the altercation before anyone was seriously injured. Naruto nodded. "You ought to pay attention to your sensei." With an internal smirk, Naruto continued, "You don't want to seriously hurt yourself before our graduation test tomorrow." He enjoyed playing with Master Itachi's younger brother. "Stop. I'll fight this battle to the very end," he snarled, then quickly moved to where Naruto was standing. He delivered a flawless round house kick to Naruto's head, but the blonde easily sidestepped the blow, slipping down and out of the grasp Sasuke was trying to get him in. Observing his opponent's movements, Sasuke pushed himself off the ground and returned around, this time aiming for Naruto's chest, but the newcomer danced away, his hands never leaving his pockets. Sasuke narrowed his eyes. As if a kunai wasn't enough, the boy with the raven hair tore one out of his holster and skillfully spun it around on his point finger, holding it in a maneuverable position with its point toward the ground. He ran at Naruto one last time, determined to make this his final attack. Naruto rolled his eyes, and for his final move, he chose to turn it up a notch, just for the audience. He closed his eyes. After a brief moment of surprise, Sasuke immediately returned to his ninja thinking state. He's giving up. I had higher expectations. The class gasped as Sasuke yelled, slashing out with his arm, the point aimed directly at the boy's side. Then he was gone, and his blade struck nothing but the air around him once more. Ino nearly screamed when she saw Naruto appear directly behind the Uchiha, who had no idea he was there. With a quick and sharp shock to his back, Sasuke was flung across the field, uprooting dirt and grass, and landing in a twisted heap in the upper right corner. Everyone held their breath as Naruto flashed over to Sasuke's motionless body, bending down to where his face was buried in the ground. "So did I," was Naruto's muttered response. Sasuke clenched his jaw in rage. He was going down. Naruto smirked inwardly at the boy's rage and then calmly left the battlefield, while the Uchiha fangirls merely glared at the blonde's back with fire in their eyes. How dare he hurt their Sasuke? Only Ino, Hinata, Tenten, and Sakura weren't in a funk over the emo boy. They were all shocked that the class's top ninja, Sasuke Uchiha, had just been defeated by someone who had shown up out of the blue and had no prior training records. 3 of the boys from the class, including the brunette who had attempted to trick him earlier, suddenly surrounded Naruto. "Dude, you are amazing." The puppy on his head was barking in agreement as the teenager yelled. "Yes, you truly did show Sasuke." The child beside him added. He was dressed in brown pants and a cream-colored shirt with a red symbol printed on it. He was wearing a green jacket with short sleeves and a long white scarf that reached his knees. White bandages were wrapped around his arms and legs, and he was wearing the typical ninja shoe. His cheeks were adorned with thin, red swirls, and he had that innocent, smiling baby face. He was deserving of that beating, acting all superior all the time. The last one said, watching the clouds roll by lazily. His brown hair was tied up in a high ponytail, spiked out crazily, looking like the top of a pineapple. He had black pants and a netting shirt, covered by a light green short sleeve jacket ending at the top of his rib cage. He had two small, silver earrings hanging from his ears. He held out his hand, smiling slightly. "The name's Shikamaru," he said, "and this is Choji and Kiba." Naruto looked at each of the others in turn before he cautiously stared at the hand that was extended to him. He slowly reached out and took a loose grasp, and Shikamaru grinned while Choji and Kiba grinned behind him. Kiba said, "So, we never caught your name." Naruto sighed, "Here we go. You don't need to know my name, and it doesn't matter. I have to go and train now, if you'll excuse me," Naruto said icily, pushing past the bewildered academy students and making his way a short distance before vanishing in a flash. The art of patience had always been more difficult for the boy to learn than ninjutsu, but after years of Itachi's training and words of wisdom, Naruto had become accustomed to being silent and calm, becoming one with the world around him. Naruto was standing in the middle of a field, near the edge of the village, with his eyes closed and his eyes closed. He breathed steadily and evenly, concentrating on remaining still and motionless, of course, completely masking his chakra sense. When a high-pitched whining came from his microphone, he snapped out of his trance and fell to the ground, muttering curses as he pulled himself off the forest floor and raised a hand to respond to the call. A chuckle came from the other end as he obstinately said, "You ruined my focus." He already knew who it was. "Continually practice. What about forming some friendships?" Itachi answered, putting the child's intelligence to the test. Naruto let out a deep breath. Itachi grinned as Naruto responded robotically, staring at his feet, "You told me to stay as distanced as I can. Don't talk to anyone unless spoke to and never reveal anything of value." "Excellent, excellent. Now, how did your spying debut go?" Naruto shrugged, briefly forgetting that they were on intercom and not seated next to each other. The Uchiha asked, going on to business. "All right, but generally pretty dull. Pranksters and no.it. All's abound in the classroom. And fangirls, too." The blonde, picking at a patch of grass, explained. Itachi's end was silent for a few minutes, and Naruto started to think they had lost connection. It wasn't until the fight that things really got going. "Master Itachi?" he called as he moved to reposition the station. "Combat?" Hesitantly, as though frightened of the response, his teacher asked. "Yes. Sasuke, your younger brother. You know, he's a pain in the ass." The dark-haired teenager gasped and his eyes widened as Naruto babbled, acting so superior. "You met Sasuke, right?" he repeated in a whisper. The 12-year-old said, "Yes." Itachi let out the breath he didn't realize he was holding, his mind racing. "Naruto, pay close attention to what I have to say. I do not want you to have any contact with Sasuke. He might sabotage the whole scheme, and you and the others will be apprehended. You get it?" he ordered swiftly, and Naruto sat stunned for a few seconds before rapidly shaking himself awake. He muttered, "Okay, course Master Itachi." He was still perplexed as to why his sensei would act in such a manner, considering that I was only his younger brother and had not yet succeeded him in the Uchiha path. "Good. I'll have to leave you now. Even though I am still one country away, the organization has a meeting tonight. Maintain communication and keep your lines open. I'll be back soon to see how you're doing." Itachi, who appeared cheerful once more, explained, "And remember, stay secluded." Then he disappeared, the line buzzing with static. Naruto sighed and turned off the device, not really wanting to go back to training, so he easily jumped into a walk, strolling towards his old apartment. The sun was now setting behind the Hokage's monument, and the villager population was starting to withdraw to their homes, with the teenagers and drinkers coming out to play. Naruto sighed, his cerulean eyes letting a little sadness leak past their barricade of boredom. He had developed an immunity to the stares and gawks of people during his training because they had passed through so many towns on their journey, but those looks had been on interest or curiosity. He had not felt the hated glares of the villagers for so long, and it still got to him. He could feel the hot glares on his back, the killing intent coming from almost every one of those people. 8 years later, nothing has changed, the glares and the sense of emptiness. My time will come, the plan will be carried out, and I will leave a legacy and be viewed differently by the villagers. The question now is, however, will I be able to endure it until then? It was the day of the graduation test, and the room was alive with activity, with every student practically on the edge of their seats in anticipation of the upcoming tests, and hopefully, graduation parties. However, the most focused topic was one of the class's favorite pastime discussions. The academy class was buzzing with excitement and nervousness, with everyone talking in small groups, offering encouragement, and placing bets as to who would do better. "Have you heard about his most recent journey?" To her group of friends, which included Sakura, Hinata, and 10.10, Ino whispered. "Yes, my mother informed me that she had overheard the captain discussing it. Isn't it amazing?" 10.10 grinned and replied, and all three of the girls nodded. They were talking about none other than the hero that had spread across the nations in a matter of years, stretching from simply stopping burglars moving all the way up to taking down armies single-handedly. He went by the name of Fire Fox, the fact being that he knew so many fire jutsu above all others. When word of this hero first came about, a great fraction of the class believed that it was Sasuke, due to the fact that he was exceedingly excellent at fire-type attacks and that he disappeared before the village's forces of ninja arrived, not a trace of him left. But that assumption was quickly killed when more news of the unknown ninja's deeds leaked around the nations. He had been traveling all over the countries, starting in the Sea Country and moving into the lower regions of the Fire Country. He had recently been reported in a major trading town down south, called Kazuaki Port. He had stopped a kidnapping of the Lord's daughter, which happened to turn out to be one of their trading partners. The man had planned to hold the girl for a grand ransom, causing the Lord to become so poor, the trading facility would need to be shut down, leaving all the business for his port. Fire Fox was rapidly establishing a global reputation. Hinata stammered, fiddling with her fingers as she said, "It really makes you wonder who they really are. Yes, but why is he doing it? Putting his life in danger for strangers?" The boys behind them rolled their eyes. They could be such girls. "Talk about a true hero," Ino said, her eyes gleaming dreamily. Kiba interrupted them to say, "If you ask me, he's probably in it for fame, or the money." "Kiba. He is undoubtedly a kind, forgiving, and giving individual," Kiba sneered as Ino yelled, firing to protect the hero. "As though, with each deed, he receives a large payment. You know, look at the facts. Cages, lords, rich landowners." Sakura interrupted with a smug grin, "And little old ladies, and poor people, and children, and even beggars." Kiba interrupted, his face changing to one of thoughtful contemplation. "Anyway," leaning back in his chair, he muttered, "I still think it's all about the money." Hinata pointed out, if he really wanted the riches Kiba, he would have revealed his presence by now. The four girls laughed as the brunette was admired by the other three, and he looked for an excuse to sneer at the ninja in question, but he found none. Sakura remarked, "Point 1. High fives broke out among the group as Kiba crossed his arms firmly across his chest and pouted like he was 5 again. Iruka then entered the room, causing all of the chattering students to rush to their seats and fall on top of each other. The village leader, the Sandame Hokage, followed the Chunin, and his wrinkled face softly smiled when he saw all the staring faces. Iruka turned to the class, the attendance board in his hands. "Today is the day of the final exam, which will assess your skills and determine whether you are prepared to proceed to Genin. You will pick up your forehead protector at the desk if you pass the assessment that the Hokage and I will be scoring." Iruka said, "Now, first up will be Aburame Shino." Iruka called out the first name on the clipboard, and a child in the back got up and started to descend to the floor without making eye contact with anyone else. He was dressed simply in black pants, a long, light green jacket that covered half of his face, and black sunglasses that concealed his eyes. In a few words, he was eerie and mysterious, but that was all everyone knew about him because he had never spoken much. The three vanished into a front room, and as soon as the door closed, the students dispersed throughout the room to resume their groups, with Ino, Sakura, Hinata, and 10.10 all huddled up talking about the newest fashion trends. Kiba, Shoji, and Shikamaru sitting calmly behind them, talking about their opinions on video games and other random ideas that came to mind, while the rest of the class gathered across the room to play a game of Janege, a card game they had apparently invented during the study time Iruka always provided them at the end of the day. Finally, the lone Uchiha sat in the front corner, farthest away from all the chaos, with his hands folded and his chin resting on top of them, staring into space, his favorite pastime position. The new child was the only one absent, and every few minutes someone's gaze would dart to the door to check if the newest hot topic was on its way. They returned about 5 minutes later, Shino sporting a ninja headband and a shiny Konoha headband, and some of the children, Ood, and Ahhed, whispering to their friends that that would be them next, walking out of that room triumphantly. Akamichi Choji. Iruka yelled as he waited for the boy to get up. The teenager swallowed uneasily, holding the bag of chips tightly, reducing some of them to dust. His friends gave him a supportive pat on the back and said, "Good luck," and "You can do it." He walked slowly up the stairs and into the room, with Iruka right behind him. Everyone's focus was diverted from their conversations to the door when it creaked, and the boy they had all been so excited to see entered. Naruto smirked as he entered the room calmly, still wearing the expression, "I really don't want to be here." He sank into a chair in the first row, a good distance from Sasuke and the rest of the class. The raven-haired boy narrowed his eyes and turned away from him, glaring at the wall. "Are hormones running high today? Is that the cause of your overly sentimental behavior?" Sasuke's scowl deepened and his eye twitched as Naruto laughed and pushed the boy's buttons for the second time in less than 24 hours. He didn't bother to look at the newcomer, but he couldn't handle it. A Uchiha wouldn't be defeated. "You ought to be careful what you say." Sasuke snarled, "I'll beat you down into the ground faster than you can say another come back." Naruto laughed inwardly while maintaining his composure. "Really?" Sasuke snarled under his breath. "Well, as I do remember, you aren't that much of a threat," Naruto replied, leaning back in his chair and quietly closing his eyes. A small smile appeared on Naruto's lips as he darkly promised, "I've improved. No one could make enough progress to defeat me in a single day." Naruto answered, "Especially not you." Sasuke spun around, prepared to give the blonde the fight of his life, but Iruka and Choji appeared, the victorious boy with a headband proudly on his head, and his friends cheered, grinning, congratulating, and praising him. Iruka's eyes darted to the quivering Uchiha, and he followed his glare to Sasuke's target. "Ah, so glad you could join us, Na." Iruka began, but he quickly realized that the boy did not want his name to be called out loud after noticing the warning glare he was getting from the blonde newcomer. Iruka finished, covering his error, a little late because the rest of the class had noticed his slip up and was observing the boy thoughtfully, as if trying to think of a name for him. Rhea Bulistoria. A confident smile stretched across the face of a brunette with dark hair as she bounced down the stairs, and 7 academy students surrounded Iruka as soon as his pine-apple-like hair disappeared from view. "Your name begins with a Na, isn't that right?" The rest of the group gave Kiba a collective eye roll as he examined. Sakura clarified, "I think you mean Na." Naruto sighed. "Once more, this is getting really annoying." "Yes, Na is the first letter. But since I won't tell you, that's all you're going to get," Naruto replied sternly. "Who said that we wanted you to tell us?" PSH, Kiba responded, assuming a contemplative pose. "We're going to find out for ourselves." Naruto sneered. With his long blonde hair casting shadows over his eyes, he tilted back in his chair once more and replied, "Whatever." Iruka called out, "Haruno Sakura." Rhea waltzed out with pride, the notorious protector glistening on her upper arm. And Sakura bounded up from her spot on the floor to enter the room while nervously biting her lower lip. "We'll see. Starts with in, Kiba thought, his forehead furrowing. "Nawaki?" Shikamaru threw out, and Naruto just scoffed and closed his eyes, thinking that perhaps he could catch some zizis while the genin wasted their time trying to guess the name they would never get. The blonde must have actually passed out too, because the next thing he knew was the sensation of a certain Uchiha's burning gaze as he passed him on his way to the testing room. He looked around, shocked that he had only been asleep for a few minutes, when in reality, it had felt like hours. The newly graduated students were all around him, their new headbands gleaming, from their foreheads to their waists, necks, or arms. At that moment, Naruto felt the urge to wear one of those same protectors, to be identified as one of Konoha's ninja, but he quickly shook that thought away, saying, don't get attached, don't even think about it." The Konoha headband that everyone was vying for was strapped to Sasuke's forehead as he strode out of the exam room, his charcoal eyes shining with cocky victory. "Yamanaka Ino." Iruka called, bringing the list down to the final few. Ino blushed a little, but not as much as she usually does, and most of the class was shocked. "Whoa," Kiba said, smiling mischievously, "she usually tackles him if he gets in a quarter-mile area." Ino spun around and stuck her tongue out childishly before vanishing from the room. After the blonde-haired girl left, the group turned back to the other blondes seated at the table, who looked at them with utter ignorance. "We've been speculating for roughly 20 minutes now, and we still haven't discovered the answer. Would you please tell us right away?" Naruto rolled his eyes. Sometimes they could be so pitiful. Kiba whimpered, rubbing his head as though he had been deep in thought for more than a few minutes. "I'll repeat it for you. You could never force me to tell you in this lifetime." Iruka yelled, "Naruto." He erased the last name that had been hastily written on the board that morning, but as soon as he said it, he regretted it. Naruto gave him a glare so lethal that it would have burned him to a crisp right there, and Naruto was trying very hard to do so, too. The genin surrounding him grinned triumphantly, their eyes glimmering. "So, Naruto is your name, right?" Kiba said, hardly holding back his laughter, and Naruto groaned and got up, making his way to where Iruka was waiting, whispering to the Chunin as he went. He ignored the congratulations and high fives from the genin behind him and muttered, "Nice." Room of testing. Iruka sighed and sat down heavily in the chair beside the Hokage, while Naruto stood in the middle of the room, waiting for orders. "You can start." Naruto chuckled a little as Iruka explained, "Make 3 able-bodied and working clones and you pass." 3? I know Itachi said they were weak, but really, this is bad. In an instant, 10 flawless clones of the boy spread out to either side as Naruto made a seal with an open hand over a fist. Iruka grinned, not expecting anything less, and Naruto grinned back. "I wish Itachi hadn't restricted me, it's like being 7 again." "Naruto is excellent. Welcome to the leaf, Genin Naruto," he said, carefully removing a leaf headband from the table and smiling as he held it out to the blonde. "You exceeded the limit with flying colors." The only way to escape the heat that radiated down in the July days was to go to the cool night. A calm wind from the north caused the trees to dance in the darkness, the leaves singing their own little tune. The newly graduated Genin Naruto was walking down a barely perceptible path, staring at his feet in silence, the Konoha headband tied firmly to his forehead shining in the darkness, signifying that he was a ninja of the leaf, or so they believed. Earlier that morning, flashback, grabbing the forehead protector with gratitude, Naruto smiled slightly at the Hokage and Iruka before turning to face the door and his new genin classmates. As he stepped out, the only sound he heard was chairs grinding against wooden floors as everyone moved from their conversational positions to look for a leaf headband. As soon as they saw the shiny metal band, everyone in the crowd smiled, and the group in front, which included Kiba and the others, erupted in applause. When Naruto sat back down in his chair, he received a few claps on the back and words of congratulations. Sasuke simply glared at the happy group, his charcoal eyes shining red with rage. Iruka strode out of the exam room, trailed shortly after by the Hokage, who walked to the front of the room, his wrinkles from years of wear easily folding into a smile. "I want to congratulate everyone on passing the test. As proud bearers of the shinobi symbol, you are all now genin of the leaf. The will of fire has been ignited and, for some, will continue to burn brightly within you for many years to come, until the day they die. Your village is reliant on you and looks to you for protection and direction. Don't disappoint them. Learn to be a strong shinobi. This group exhibits a level of bravery and skill that I haven't seen in a long time." The Hokage said, "Be faithful, be willing, and good luck to you all." His words were full of confidence and emotion, and after finishing his brief speech, he turned and left the classroom, leaving Iruka in charge for the final time. "You will meet with your sensei and be assigned to your teams tomorrow." Iruka sighed. New ninja, still the same immature children they were 10 minutes ago. It had been foolish to actually believe that one headband would change them all at once. "Be here at 8 o'clock sharp, and if you're not, it's back to the academy," the Chunin explained. As he finished speaking, the bell's shrill whine blew, calling out the end of the day. The students rushed from their desks, tripping over each other in their rush to be the first out the door. They will soon understand how demanding a shinobi's life is, and hopefully they will be prepared for that day. Finish the flashback. He was now officially a member of the village, amidst the sea of genin who would become his teammates within the next 24 hours, and Naruto sighed as he ran his hand over the engraving on the cool metal. For the next few months, Naruto would wait, anticipating Itachi's plan. Since he began his journey with Master Itachi, the blonde had always loved stargazing. As ninja on the run, they rarely slept in buildings, instead pulling off the road and resting in trees, hidden from onlookers by the branches of the higher area. The boy smirked a little, a warm feeling filling his body as he entered a rather large clearing with a sky light in the trees, revealing the twinkling stars above. Being so far from the village, the glow of lamps and street lights didn't dim the wonders of the universe. When he heard a crazed laughter behind the shed, Naruto's occasional moment of joy was wiped away in favor of curiosity. He walked over in silence, for once his own thoughts overriding his instinct to leave, and jumped soundlessly onto the roof, climbing over until he could see the object of his wonder. A shinobi, dressed in the typical Chunin uniform, was sitting in a patch of long grass, leaning against the wooden building below. His white hair, the only flaw in his disguise, was shining white like a light among all the dark colors of the forest. A large scroll, only a few inches smaller than the blonde himself, was resting at his side. It was unraveled, and the man was studying the words splashed upon it. Hee. The village will be mine once I master these jutsu. The shinobi muttered to himself, sounding as though he had partially lost his mind. Naruto's eyes narrowed and his gaze shifted to the leaf symbol on his head, which was glowing brightly. Suddenly, the teen felt a sense of determination that he hadn't experienced in a long time. He felt as though he needed to stop the shinobi before him from carrying out the heinous deed he was planning. Naruto couldn't understand why he felt the need to stop the man, rather than stand by with a bowl of popcorn and watch firsthand as the village burned to the ground. The blonde shook himself out of his thoughts and concluded that he simply wanted to stop him because if he took down the leaf, Master Itachi's plans and dreams would be lost, be nothing. The traitorous shinobi's eyes flashed up to his, full of shock and confusion. He certainly hadn't been expecting a visitor. Naruto sighed. Oh well. He coiled agilely, launching himself down from the roof without difficulty, landing with a soft thud in front of him. Naruto stood up to full height, crossing his arms over his chest stiffly. With his cerulean eyes dutifully observing the man's reaction, Naruto said darkly, I don't believe that belongs to you. The white-haired ninja simply sat there in a daze, staring, trying to process the fact that he had been caught, but he was soon jolted out of his reverie when Naruto stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the scroll, and the shinobi snatched the parchment away, rolling it back up with a flick of his wrist. Because a pair of scrawny arms could prevent him from getting what he wanted, Naruto rolled his eyes and snarled, clutching it protectively to his chest. It's mine now. Naruto stepped back towards him and muttered, You're messing with the wrong guy. The man retreated, stepping back. As if I, a Chunin of the Leaf, could be defeated by a mere genin like you. My name is Mizuki, and I'm fantastic. The man chuckled, and Naruto sneered. You don't deserve to wear that symbol. The blonde went on, taking another step forward. He raised his head and looked directly into the man's eyes, his expression neutral. The ninja staggered backwards. The boy's gaze made him uneasy, even if he was just a recently graduated genin. Mizuki's eyes gave the boy a once-over, measuring him up if he decided to attack. His brow furrowed as he studied the whisker. Like marks on his cheeks, which seemed oddly familiar. Then he realized, and his eyes widened, and a million different emotions ran through his eyes in a wave. Fear, misunderstanding, confusion, suspicion, doubt, anger, hatred, and confusion. His teeth clenched, and he smiled unexpectedly. Neither do you deserve the headband. Even walking among humans is not something you deserve. You're not even close to being a hero or an aide, so the term, ninja, is pointless. He yelled, accusingly pointing to the 12-year-old boy. Naruto shrugged. Who said that I was a helper or a hero? He answered plainly, and Mizuki laughed. You're correct. Aren't both of those people human? No, your standards are different. You are the lowest subject of all life on Earth. A demon spawn. You aren't deserving of life, and you don't justify your existence on this planet. Demon. You were meant to be exterminated years ago. Making it obvious what he was talking about, he yelled. I wonder how you even survived. You must have sucked people's lives until you satisfied your desire to die. Naruto sneered as he continued. The man laughed when the blonde said, I'm not a vampire. You're not, of course. You're worse than 1,000 enemy ninjas advancing from the horizon or a vampire. The nine-tailed fox is you. To his surprise, the teenager simply stood there, staring at him with the same expressionless face he had been wearing for the previous few minutes, as the shinobi made his grand announcement while closely observing his expression. Tell me something I don't know. Just a few seconds ago, Mizuki's expression was one of pure triumph, but now it was one of confusion. You knew? That should increase your rage and urge to kill that thing even more. Why would you do that, though? Mizuki's raging gleam returned as he exclaimed, You'd only be killing yourself, and besides, he is your only ally. Naruto's fists clenched. This was always the touchiest of subjects with him, and it made his blood boil to hear gullible people refer to him as the demon itself, as if he were the murderous killing machine rather than just its container. That you would even consider exposing your face here astounds me. I mean, going back to where everyone wants you dead and expecting them to accept you for who you are. The concept is insane. Naruto could sense the wrath and fury rising from the bottom of his heart, the utter desire to kill turning into his own values and priorities. His objective was now to see the man dead and frigid. The blonde had only experienced this twice in his life, during training with Itachi. His master had ordered him to suppress these emotions, saying that they would only make him lose a battle. He clarified that the only thing that was haunting him was his hatred for the villagers, and that the best way to deal with it was to push it away and ignore it, and never use it. In order to do this, Naruto closed his eyes and focused on the area where he felt the intent radiating the most. He pushed against it, feeling the intense resistance strain his muscles, and after a few seconds without making any progress, the force started to move cautiously back into the darkness, where it would hide and wait for another opportunity to be released. Naruto took a deep breath and calmly said, "Just give me the scroll, and I'll forget this ever happened." Mizuki was staring at him in confusion, unsure of what he was going to do, and he returned to reality, his breath coming short. He always felt out of breath when he did this, as if it had cost him his entire store of stamina. But Mizuki refused to accept it, and with a sneer that promised to fight, he tied an awaiting string to his back. He laughed back, his sanity beginning to doubt itself. Never. Naruto sighed. Well, there was no avoiding it now. The blonde squatted and then disappeared, as if he had never been there at all. Mizuki frantically searched the clearing for his opponent, who appeared to be invisible, but he was startled when he was knocked out of his breath by a blow to the back, which made him stagger forward. He spun around, prepared to strike back, but to his astonishment, Naruto had already vanished, moving again. Flashing into view, the blonde delivered a round house kick that struck the right side of Mizuki's face, sending the Chunin to the ground as Naruto landed silently in front of the fallen man, his face unreadable. Sheesh, I'd hate to see what the rest of the genin class can do if the Chunin are this bad. The white-haired shinobi lifted himself off the ground and, as Naruto was thinking, he struck him blindly, aiming for the middle of his stomach. He danced to the left, easily avoiding the blow, and caused the man to fall forward. He quickly regained his height and wheeled around on his heel, sweeping Naruto's knee. The blonde began to fall backwards, a perfectly undefended position for an attack, but he was back on his feet as quickly as light, his eyes darting around the battlefield, preparing his attacks and defenses, his dodges and strikes. He was immediately attracted to the sight of the treetops, which were outlined by a gentle yellow glow, signifying daylight. Is it already morning? It was still quite early, judging by the shadows that were starting to appear. The academy was probably not even open yet, but he still wanted to get there quickly, and the academy's layout was only a small portion of Itachi's plan. Better get this done quickly. After avoiding another blow from Mizuki, Naruto responded with a blow of his own, enhanced by his chakra, which was 10 times as powerful as his usual blows and struck dead center, directly on Mizuki's left temple. The blow's force was so great that it sent Mizuki reeling to the ground, where he shook his head angrily in an attempt to restore his vision. I'll defeat you. The great Mizuki is me. Well, we might as well expedite this process, he yelled, his eyelids drooping with unconsciousness. Naruto slung the man over his shoulder, untying the scroll from his back, and mumbled, yeah, great, unbeatable, blah blah. He then injected a tiny shot of his chakra into one of the man's pressure points, causing his eyes to widen and the shinobi to go unconscious in a matter of seconds. He hopped onto the closest branch and started toward the Hokage's tower, whispering, now to make my returns, take out the trash and then it's off to school. Later in the morning, every genin in the class was excited for their first day as official Leaf Ninja, and everyone was happy except for 3 people. Naruto, who was sleeping soundly in his chair, Shino, who was examining a bug that had flown into the classroom, and Sasuke, who was merely staring at the wall. The blonde was startled out of his sleep as Iruka entered the room and the door slammed shut behind him. Well done. As you near the end of your academy career, you are prepared to enter the world of shinobi. Your sensei will be assigned to you today, and they will instruct you as they see fit. So listen up and pay attention, Iruka said, addressing each student directly. He raised his clipboard and started reading out names and teams once he was certain that everyone was at least somewhat attentive. Team 1 will be 6 teams later. Now, Team 7 will consist of Sasuke Uchiha will be on Team 7. Sasuke grinned a little, his eyes briefly shifting to meet Naruto's. Sakura Haruno. Sakura grinned. Sasuke's team. Congrats, Ino. And Naruto. Sasuke scowled as Naruto grinned. Get a squad together, this might get interesting, oh boy. I wonder if Sasuke's face would shatter if he scowled anymore. Kakashi Hatake will be your sensei. Shino Aburame, Kiba Inuzuka, and Hinata Hyuga will now make up Team 8. Yuhi Kurenai will be your sensei. Ino Yamanaka, Shoji Akamichi, and Shikamaru Nara will make up Team 10. Asuma Sarutobi will be your instructor." Sasuke glared at Naruto. Sakura stared at him, and Naruto tried to ignore them all, wanting nothing more than to blow this off and sleep or train. Anything was better than this. The class was humming with excitement as new team members greeted one another and friends offered words of encouragement and congratulations. "Your sensei will be here shortly, and from then on out, they will instruct you on what to do," Iruka said. After a couple of hours, all of the students in Iruka's academy classroom were with their new teams. Well, all but 3 of them. 2 hours. Naruto said, "The man is 2 hours late." Even he was growing impatient with the length of time it was taking for this man to arrive. In addition, Sakura mumbled, "Talk about a great first impression." She was lying on her back on the floor, staring at the ceiling in utter boredom, while Sasuke was responding with a simple, "HN," as he always did. "I suggest we simply bail." Sakura looked at him as he watched the clock, his eyes following the second hand as if it were his job, and Naruto suggested, "Let him come looking for us." Sakura said, "That wouldn't be a very good first notion on our part." Naruto simply shrugged. "The man is free to think anything he wants. The fact that we've been sitting here by ourselves for an hour and a half is what matters to me, but that's about all." The blonde yelled, "This time could have been used for training, sleep, or something much more interesting than this." He said the most words he had since arriving. "Well, perhaps we could spend some time bonding and getting to know one another better," Sakura said. Sasuke and Naruto both gazed at her blankly, and the next few seconds went by without a word. She realized she was not going to get much enthusiasm from these two, so she sighed, "Never mind." An hour later, Naruto mumbled, "That's it, I'm so gone," and got up to go to the window, but before he could get there, a man appeared in front of him in a cloud of smoke. "And where do you anticipate traveling?" His lone eye narrowed as he asked, and Naruto looked up, examining him. "Leaving," was his straightforward response. Naruto raised an eyebrow in question, but the man quickly shrugged and moved back to where the other two were waiting. "Not if I have a say about it," he said without hesitation, his gaze steady. "Now, I am Kakashi Hitaki, your sensei. I had no idea that a Cyclops would be our teacher." Sakura giggled as Naruto remarked softly, "They definitely left that out of their description." Kakashi sighed. "Fantastic, a comedian. Look, let's make today quick and easy because I'm just as excited to be here as you guys are." "Okay," Kakashi said, glancing at each of the 3. When he didn't hear back for a while, he sighed. They just sat there at first, staring at the place where he used to be, but then he muttered, "Just meet me on the roof," and vanished in a puff of smoke. Sakura pulled herself off the ground and said, "Well, I guess we better head up there." Naruto and Sasuke moaned and grudgingly got up from their seats, following their pink-haired teammate to the stairs that led to the roof. The roof. A good 3 stories down, Kakashi sat on a pole with a view of the academy's front entrance, reading a little orange book and occasionally laughing while he waited for his burdens. I mean, his students. "How on earth are you reading this?" Naruto was looking over his shoulder, scanning the lines of writing on the pages, when a voice cut him off, making the masked Junin jump. Kakashi snapped the book closed and placed it in his vest pocket. Kakashi's eye narrowed as Naruto sat on a cement step and said, "Wow, you must be a really suckish Junin if you hadn't sensed him coming. Most genin don't know how to mask their chakra, but he did it so well that I didn't notice him coming. Well, let's try to survive this first train wreck of many to come, okay? I have a routine to stick to. Okay, tell me your name, interests, dislikes, and aspirations." He pointed to Sakura and said, "Starting with you." "Sakura Haruno is my name. Spending time with my friends and gardening are my pastimes. I enjoy reading medical journals, and I don't like that Ino keeps bugging me about." "Well, yeah." When she mentioned her dislikes, the girl blushed and said, "My dream is to become a great medical ninja, seeing as I'm not that great at ninjutsu." Kakashi and the other male team members rolled their eyes inward. "Fantastic, a fangirl." Kakashi pointed to Sasuke and remarked, "You're the next emo boy." "I'm Sasuke Uchiha." He answered in a monotone, "My dream is to kill off the man who murdered my family. My only like is training. My dislikes are most things else. I don't have a hobby. An Avenger. That might cause problems later on. I'll save you the trouble because I'm a nice guy." Kakashi arched an eyebrow at Naruto's response. "My name is Naruto. I don't have a hobby, a like or a dislike, and my dreams are of none of your concern." The emo Avenger, the cocky mystery, and the love-sick fangirl, don't they make an intriguing trio? You are aware that the name is Kakashi. Kakashi clarified, I don't have a hobby, a few likes, a few dislikes, and a dream that you don't need to know. Is that pornographic book not regarded as a pastime? Sakura snickered at Naruto's remark, and Sasuke even gave him a little smirk. Kakashi answered, shut up kid. Alright, let me tell you what you'll be doing tomorrow now that introductions are over. You may believe that you are a ninja, wearing that forehead protector and being badass everywhere you go, but you are not. This was Kakashi's favorite part of the test. You haven't officially passed the Genin exams just yet. His team's eyes were filled with confusion as they simply stared back. You have a 66% chance of failing the test that you will take tomorrow morning. Oh, and don't eat breakfast. I want you to be at training field number 9 at precisely 6 in the morning. Why not? Inquired Naruto. Kakashi replied bluntly, you'll puke, while poofing away in his smoke cloud. Sakura sighed, well, at least it's to the point. Her team had so far displayed quiet, troublesome levels, and now she had to worry about tomorrow's test. Naruto said, I'll see you guys at 7 because I'm going to train. According to Sasuke, he told us 6. Naruto answered, look, I don't expect him to be there until around then, so take my advice, wait until then. He then leapt off the academy's roof and vanished in mid-fall. Sakura and Sasuke exchanged a single glance before parting ways to get ready for the task at hand. Kakashi showed up in front of the old man's desk in the Hokage's office with a book in hand. Sarutobi looked up from his word, but there were only a few reports in the normally heaping stack. Yes, what is it, Kakashi? He asked, setting the pen down on the desk. Kakashi bowed respectfully before giving the man a serious look. Kakashi began, it's about my new team sir, or rather, a certain member of my team. Sarutobi was already aware of who he was referring to. He said, you mean Naruto? Kakashi nodded. Sarutobi's eyes narrowed in perplexity as the Junin explained. Now, I haven't seen his skills as of yet, but while I was on the roof, distracted, he managed to sneak up on me and take me by surprise. With a furrowed brow, the Hokage said, I've never heard of a genin able to mask their chakra sense the day after the graduate from the academy. Kakashi nodded in agreement. I believe he had to have received instruction prior to his return to the village, and it's clear that he was somewhat skilled. Sarutobi nodded as Kakashi continued. No common rogue could have taught him how to hide it so well that even a trained Junin couldn't detect it. Yes, this is both amazing and terrifying. He must have received training from someone outside these walls if he had any. The Hokage replied, looking for a solution to this intriguing case. It might have just been all those years in the wild. It would be a necessity to learn to remain undetected by all the enemy ninja he must have been surrounded by daily. Obviously, the possibilities are endless. However, he simply seems too strong for a child. Kakashi said, I'll be watching him closely during tomorrow's bell test. Sarutobi nodded. Nice concept. We need to know exactly how far his skills extend, but we can't make snap judgments at this point in the situation. From now on, we have to watch Naruto closely. About 40 minutes ago, hunger had swept over them, and now the leaves on the trees were beginning to look nice. Sasuke and Sakura moaned together, having been standing there for an hour and still not seeing Kakashi. A concentrated wind suddenly gathered in the middle of the field, and both genin looked up, wondering if their sensei had arrived at last. However, Naruto was the one standing there with 2 breakfast bagels after the swirling leaves had cleared. Sasuke whispered, you're an hour late, Dobi. Naruto gave him a reprimanding finger shake. Is this the proper way to address someone who served you breakfast? He remarked mockingly. Remember, we're not allowed to eat. Sasuke fired, and Naruto shrugged. He handed them each a bagel and said, he also told me to be here at 6, and yet here I am at 7. Aren't I just the little delinquent today? After exchanging glances, Sakura and Sasuke shrugged and ate the bagel Naruto had brought them. The blonde then leapt up into a low tree branch, closed his eyes, and leaned against the trunk. Sasuke looked up at him and sighed. Though the retort didn't sound as sharp as it usually did, he said, I still don't like you. Naruto grinned. Sakura watched him curiously as he replied, right back at ya. He instantly fell asleep. How is that accomplished? She pondered, but before she could continue, a puff of smoke diverted their focus from the blonde who was dozing off. Good morning. I apologize for being late. I had to assist a small elderly woman across the street, Kakashi said, grinning and crinkling his mask. Kakashi looked up at the boy, narrowing his eyes, and Naruto muttered, bullshit, from his perch in the tree. Yeah, well, today is your last exam and your last opportunity to truly become a leaf shinobi and genin. Naruto's eyes opened slightly at Kakashi's final explanation. As you already know, the rate of passing is very low, and with me as your opponent, it lowers those statistics to a minimum. The opposition? He asked. Kakashi nodded, then produced two tiny, tinkling bells from his star pouch. You have until noon to remove these bells from me, and you won't be able to have lunch until you have them, he said. But since there are 3 of us and 2 bells, does that imply that one of us goes hungry? Clearly the smartest of the 3, Sakura said, and Kakashi grinned. Even worse. The 3rd bell. Less one goes hungry and is chained to the post until I decide to let them go. On your mark, get ready to go. Naruto sighed and pushed himself off the tree limb, flipping to the ground with skill as Kakashi disappeared into the woods in a streak of green and blue. Any suggestions, then? Sakura inquired, and Sasuke gave a nod. Darkly, he said, yeah, I go and get one of those bells for myself and you two kill each other for the remaining one. He then absconded after his sensei, leaving Sakura and Naruto alone. And I assume you'd like to follow suit, Sakura, who hardly looked at the blonde, guessed. No, he left a startled girl behind and walked off into the woods, saying, I'm going to help you get your bell. She scurried after him after waking up from her daze. How about you? Observing him intently, she pondered. Naruto shrugged. I don't want it, was his straightforward response. Sakura reminded him, but you'll get tied up to the post. Naruto looked at her with a question in his eyes. And, being tied to a post isn't that big a deal in my eyes, he said, waiting as though she had more to say, not after the things I've seen, the things I've done. Perhaps he does have a heart, Sakura said with a gentle smile. Out in the woods, standing in a clearing, facing each other from opposite sides, were Sasuke and Kakashi. So, the Avenger confronts me by himself? Do you think that's a wise choice? Sasuke clenched his teeth in exasperation as Kakashi said, turning a page in his book. The boy took a stance and growled, I can beat you and get that bell without their help, no problem. Kakashi grinned and tucked the book into his vest pocket. I think those teammates of yours are coming from the north, but I would really enjoy a little workout. Sasuke roared in defiance and ran toward the Junin, reaching for a bell, but the ninja vanished as soon as his fingers touched the metal, leaving the raven-haired teenager to fall to the ground and smash his fist into the dirt. And something tells me that they'll be a little more interesting than you, he said. He whispered, I don't think so, and quickly disappeared, following his escaping teacher. Sakura and Naruto. Do you believe that tactic will be sufficient to defeat him? Sakura repeated the thought. I mean, Kakashi is one of the best Junin we've had in years. Naruto nodded. After Naruto affirmed, trust me, it'll work. Sakura halted beside him and looked around as well, but Naruto abruptly stopped in his tracks, his cerulean eyes darting around the trees. What's it, Naruto? Then, more quickly than she could see, Naruto spun around and grabbed the hand firmly as he took a blow to the head. Are you keeping up with me? Kakashi grinned as Naruto tightened his fingers around his fist and said, because you know, that's called stalking. Before he flipped out of the boy's grasp, he said, search and destroy is part of my job as Junin. He landed almost silently a few yards away with a kunai in hand. Sakura looked at the blonde and nodded briskly, forming a simple genjutsu seal. Suddenly, he was surrounded by roughly 9 blonde shinobi, all of them charging in on the attack. Kakashi scoffed. He raised his hands and made a release seal, muttering, as if this could throw me off. Release, he shouted, but to his astonishment, nothing changed in his vision, and the stream of Narutos kicked him hard in the back, propelling him higher into the air, above the treetops. Just when Kakashi thought they had finished beating him, the real teen jumped off another and launched himself above Kakashi, grinning smugly. Kakashi narrowed his eyes. They may have gotten him with the fake genjutsu attack, but he wasn't one to be outdone. Naruto then pushed from behind and flew through the air, his feet outstretched and aimed directly at Kakashi's chest. His hands flew through a string of seals, and with a clap of his hands, released a wave of hurtling air, racing toward the blonde. Fuden. Daitopa, he cried. Just as it appeared that the attack would hit dead center, Naruto swung out and grabbed the top of a pin tree, sweeping himself out of the way as the great wind passed harmlessly, instead knocking a flock of birds out of the air. Taking advantage of the momentum, Naruto swung around the tree and shot himself toward the Junin, his body moving at high speeds. Kakashi threw up his hands, barely deflected the punch Naruto threw at him, and the blonde responded with a kick to his ribcage, only to be outdone there. The falling pair entered the tree line, hitting numerous branches along the way, neither of them letting go of the other to try to slow their descent. They hit the ground with a boom. Sasuke had been thrown into the mix now. He had witnessed the aerial fight and had jumped right in when they landed. Sakura ran up to the large crater where their bodies made contact with the earth, and she attempted to wave away the dust that rose from the gaping hole. She didn't think anyone could be able to move after a fall like that, but she was quickly proven wrong when the two shinobi stumbled out of the hollow, locked in hand-to hand combat. Sasuke slashed at Naruto's head. He was definitely not going to let the no.it.all rookie beat him on this test. Naruto skillfully flipped away from the fight, his breathing a little labored, even though the fall had dented his incredible strength and stamina. His wise cerulean eyes scanned the fight between Sasuke and Kakashi, who seemed to have forgotten about the blonde and pink-haired shinobi standing nearby. Sasuke was upset that Naruto had displayed such power at such a young age, and the rage had given him a boost, turning him into a blurred ball of blue rage. Sakura was about to approach the blonde teenager when she noticed Naruto's hand reaching to his back and slowly removing his sword from its sheath. The blade was dark gray. The hilt was plain black with tiny gold swirls twisted throughout the darkness. Then, in a flash, Naruto was running toward the two with his sword adeptly held at his side, spinning in a tight circle for agility, and as he got close to them, he leapt easily into the air and struck Kakashi with a downward stroke. Sakura was shocked, not expecting the boy to kill their sensei for the bell, but before she could scream in horror, she saw Naruto appear by her side with his sword back on his back. Sasuke and Kakashi stood a short distance away, both shocked and completely unharmed. Since the two bells were hanging in Naruto's hand, the string that Naruto had cut from Kakashi's belt slightly tore. "We win." Itachi's caution. As Team 7 stood in the open space of Training Field 9, Kakashi was examining the three, while Sakura and Naruto stood off to the side, Sakura grinning subtly and Naruto, as usual, looking bored but with a hint of satisfaction in his face, sat on the ground, tied with his hands behind him, to one of the big wooden posts in the middle of the clearing, glaring at the blonde with his onyx eyes blazing with rage. When Naruto looked at him, Sasuke growled, "That bell should have been mine. You stole it from me." The boy merely shrugged. As he fought against his restraints, Naruto ignored the Uchiha and muttered, "Maybe you would have gotten it if you had actual talent." Sasuke spat, "I will beat you." Kakashi sighed, and Naruto simply blinked back, only infuriating the raven-haired teenager. "Sasuke, I'm considering sending you back to the academy," but Naruto and Sakura passed the test. With a look of disbelief on his face, Sasuke turned to face his sensei at this point. Sasuke's rage was the most emotion anyone had heard the Uchiha express in a long time. "What? I'm way stronger than they are. Why would I be sent back while these two continue on? So I didn't get a stupid bell. That doesn't mean I should go back," he lashed out. "Because they truly understand what it means to be on a team. They found a way to work together, combining their strengths into an incredible force and covering their weaknesses as one. You have not even begun to grasp the thought that the test wasn't about your strength or even your smarts. It was to see how well you'd work together as a team. To see if you would actually work out in the real ninja world." Kakashi said with an unidentified gleam in his eyes. The wind in the trees, rustling their leaves to the intense moment below, was the only sound for a good minute. Then something occurred that signaled the end of the world. With a sigh, Sasuke said, "I guess I have a few things to work on." His ebony eyes dimmed until they returned to their typical neutral look. He looked at the two who were looking at him in disbelief. According to the tone of his voice, he was using a lot of willpower to say, "And maybe you two can help." Then the end of the world really began. Naruto grinned. It wasn't the sardonic grin he was known for, nor was it one of those fake grins meant to get someone off their ass. It was an act of sincerity and reliability. Naruto replied, "And we will if you let us." His voice was quiet and gentle, with not the slightest trace of sarcasm. Sakura and Kakashi would have likely suffered a heart attack if Sasuke had returned the smile. One day is too much for a ninja to handle. Kakashi let out a sigh. "Well, then. I am happy to say that you all pass. Congratulations and yada yada yada. I want you all at the Hokage's tower tomorrow at 8. It's time to start some missions," he replied. There's no doubt that this group will be fascinating. Later that evening, Naruto read some training scrolls while seated in his apartment, surrounded by a sea of weapons that needed to be sharpened, scrolls that needed to be read, and maps that needed to be committed to memory. He lay on his back in the center of his living room floor. Naruto was relishing the quiet, which was a rather serene scene. In an instant, he was standing, the tip of his sword aimed at his intruder's throat. The room was filled with a well-known laugh. When Naruto recognized who it was, he swiftly lowered his sword. Naruto bowed to the man in front of him and flicked his sword onto his back, whispering, "So sorry, Master Itachi." "It's no problem, I'm glad to see that this village hasn't affected your senses, yet. But unfortunately, I'm not here on pleasure. I'm here to talk to you about what I instructed a few days ago," Itachi replied. Naruto scowled, appearing somewhat perplexed. "What about it?" Itachi questioned. "Well, what exactly did I tell you that I wanted you to do?" "Stay distanced, don't show them your true power and wait for the plan to fall into action," Naruto said. Itachi gave a nod. He asked, "And can you tell me what you did wrong?" "I don't think I failed, only used about a fourth of my knowledge, power and strength, not telling them much of anything. They found out my name by a slip of my teacher's tongue. And no one suspects a thing. I don't see why." "Naruto, really, I've taught you to be more observant than this. If you don't know the reason I'm here, then I must have wasted the last 7 years of my life teaching you," Itachi screamed in a loud voice. Naruto flinched. It had been a long time since he had heard Itachi so enraged and vicious, particularly not when it was directed at him. "I was only showing them basic kindness. I mean, how am I supposed to gain their trust when I'm a cruel bastard all the time?" replied Naruto. "You were showing them warmth. I told you specifically to be detached," Itachi said. "I'm just being a normal human. But you aren't normal. You are much more extraordinary, and associating with these people will dull your chances of fulfilling your dream of becoming a legend, one that will make these people regret ever treating you the way it did," Itachi stated. "I don't see how a little breakfast and a helping hand is putting our plan in jeopardy," replied Naruto. Itachi let out a sigh. "It's kindness. Kindness leads to friendship. Friendship leads to weakness. And weakness leads to your demise," Itachi stated. Naruto nodded, but his expression was somewhat dejected. Naruto said, "So, remove myself completely?" Itachi grinned. "Exactly. I'll be checking in now and again to keep you up-to date on the plan, and to see how you're taking this meeting into effect. Until then, remember what I said," Itachi replied. Then, he vanished in a black chakra swirl. Naruto scowled. "Whatever you say, Master." The following day, Sakura and Sasuke were waiting for their sensei and other teammate outside the Hokage's office. We should have guessed he was going to be late again." Sliding down the wall and onto the floor, Sakura muttered. Sasuke tightened his jaw. While repeatedly hitting his head against the wall behind him, Sasuke muttered, "I knew I should have slept in this morning." The gust of wind in the corridor diverted their focus from their annoyance. They looked over, and in a puff of wind, Naruto was there, casual and real. Sasuke said, reverting to his distaste and boredom, "Hey Naruto." Sakura grinned. She said with a smile, "Hi Naruto. What's up?" The blonde merely gave her a blank stare before moving to the opposite side of the door and separating himself from his teammates. Sasuke observed his movements. He said, "What's up with you?" Naruto didn't even look at him, and he said nothing. Without a word, he leaned against the wall and slipped his hands into his pockets. Sakura and Sasuke looked at each other, sensing a problem. But Kakashi turned the corner, his mask wrinkled into a smile, before they could question him about it. Kakashi said, "Hello guys. Ready for the torture of D-rank missions?" Sasuke's eyebrow went up. "Ah yes, the agony of babysitting and weed pulling." Kakashi grinned. As he entered the Hokage's office, he laughed and said, "Oh you'll see, you'll see." The elderly man was muttering to himself while perusing the to-do pile at his desk. "Why can't I have an intern or something to do all this paperwork?" he murmured. Kakashi attracted the man's attention by clearing his throat. A warm smile spread across his face as he looked up. "Ah, Kakashi. Here for your team's first mission, huh?" he replied. He glanced at the trio positioned beside the Junin. "It's good to see that you're doing well so far," the Sandaime said, greeting Sakura, Sasuke, and Naruto. Naruto remained silent and merely gazed at him with lifeless eyes. The boy's abrupt change in attitude surprised the Hokage a little because, according to Kakashi, the boy had adjusted quite well and even worked with Sakura to get the bells. However, he appeared just as aloof and chilly as he had on his first day here. Had he heard something that caused him to behave in this way? The man grinned once more after shaking himself out of his reverie. Among a stack of D-rank missions, he said, "Okay, let's see what we have here." He took out a rather simple one and gave it to Kakashi. As Kakashi read the paper, the Sandaime said, "Here you go. You'll be cleaning out the river on the far side of town, near the hot springs." He put the information in his pocket after giving a nod of comprehension. He commanded, leaping out of the adjacent window. Got it. Let's go, guys. When Sakura and Sasuke hesitated, Naruto simply followed without hesitation and flew out the window in a single, smooth motion. Sakura followed suit after Sasuke shrugged and flipped out the window. As the four leapt across the rooftops, the Hokage watched, with Naruto easily keeping up with Kakashi and the other two trailing slightly behind. The individual had been more than just a rouge, and he had undoubtedly undergone some training. Who was the question? River. Kakashi read his book while sitting comfortably and dry on the bank. However, his three genin were knee-deep in the water, retrieving fast food wrappers and tin cans from the rocky bottom of the river. This sucks. Sakura muttered to herself as she stooped to retrieve an empty ramen soup cup. Sasuke remarked, I guess Kakashi was right after all about the whole tormenting thing. When Kakashi heard his name, he looked up. It made the Junin laugh. Told ya so. His attention shifted to the other team member, who was quietly gathering trash a few yards away from the others. The boy, however, was strangely not using his hands. As he moved his fingers slightly, the water would bulge in some spots and trash would rise to the water's surface, where the boy would pick it up. He halted when he noticed Kakashi observing him. The water returned to normal, and he knelt down, just like the other two. Kakashi let out a sigh. He'll give the boy credit for being very secretive. Sakura approached Naruto's workspace, where he was once more working with water. When she saw what he was doing, her eyes grew wide. She said, How are you doing that? Naruto didn't even give her a glance. She observed his expression, which remained neutral. Are you okay? Naruto merely observed his work without responding. Sakura folded her arms. I can tell something's up. Yesterday you were fine, but now you're all depressed like and you won't say a word. Sakura said. Naruto let out a sigh. Naruto whispered, Why don't you just leave me alone? Sakura gave a soft gasp. What? Naruto looked directly at her as he turned away from his work. In an attempt to be as harsh as possible, he spat, I don't want to talk to you, so why don't you just walk away and leave me alone? He detested it, especially because he wanted to be friends with both of his teammates, Sakura and Sasuke, and he liked them both, even though he would never publicly acknowledge it. Sakura's jaw tightened and she scowled. She walked back toward Kakashi and Sasuke and said, Okay, then. I'll leave you alone just like you want. I can't believe I thought you were nice. You're a jerk. As he watched her leave, Naruto ripped away and returned to his water. Sakura frowned thoughtfully as she turned to leave. She had noticed, despite his best efforts to conceal it, that he hesitated before speaking, and that there was even a hint of melancholy in those sapphire eyes. It seemed as though he didn't want to say that to her, even though she didn't understand it. But why did he if he hadn't wanted to? Sakura gave a bewildered shake of her head. He didn't want her to know, but she would. After finishing the river, the three went back to the Hokage's tower for what appeared to be simpler tasks. In a single day, they weeded two people's lawns, watched a family, we won't even discuss the specifics of that train wreck, and took dogs for 3 separate walks. The ninja, or at least genin, were tired of being ninja by the end of the day. As the three of them walked home, Sakura groaned, I'll scream if I see one more dirty diaper, leash, or shovel. Everyone had experienced a long, dull, back-breaking, and frustrating day. The emo line was immediately returned to by Sasuke, whose attitude had improved after years of stagnation. He had apparently believed that he could change if Naruto could. He went back to being Mr. Emo Avenger after the blonde demonstrated that he was still his, I don't need or want anyone in my life, self. Every time someone spoke to him, he would reply with his famous, HN, and resume his task. Naruto's eyes were usually on the ground, and he hadn't spoken since the river. The cerulean irises lacked any emotion and were flat and lifeless. At one point, Sakura believed she must have imagined the sadness she had witnessed, but she persisted in the belief. When Sakura glanced at Sasuke from the side, her face instantly flushed. She said timidly, So Sasuke, want to go somewhere for dinner? The Uchiha merely clenched his jaw and gave her a gloomy, vacant look. No, he answered. Sakura withered a little. She asked, Why not? This whole girl thing was getting really annoying, so Sasuke quietly rolled his eyes. The boy with the raven hair shot back, because I have better things to do. Sakura's jade eyes darkened slightly and her shoulders drooped noticeably. After noticing this, Naruto said it before he had a chance to stop himself or even consider it. Emo freak. Mumbled Naruto. Sakura looked at him, surprised that he had spoken at all. Sasuke narrowed his onyx eyes and gave the blonde a deadly glare. Sasuke said in a menacing and cautionary tone, What's you call me? Naruto merely gave him a wide, naive glance. The teenager asked, who called you what? With a blank, uninformed expression. Sasuke clenched his teeth, and Sakura stifled a laugh. He averted his gaze and scoffed. He muttered, whatever, as he looked blankly ahead into the deepening darkness. With a slight smirk lighting up his face, Naruto whispered again, chicken.ass hair. Sasuke appeared before him quickly this time, his coal eyes flashing homicidally. He growled, you wanna try that again? Naruto simply shrugged and pushed past him, taking a position beside Akunochi who was now laughing. As he approached Naruto's opposite side, Sasuke muttered a growl. I'd watch it if I were you. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. Naruto grinned even more broadly. He said, what are you, the Incredible Hulk? While Sasuke's frown drooped so low it appeared to be about to drop to the ground, Sakura's smile grew until it dominated her face. Naruto raised his hands in a protective gesture. Sasuke growled as Naruto joked, take it easy, Sasuke, I'm just kidding around. Gosh, has he always been this uptight? Did someone shove a pole up your ass, or what? You have a lot to say. How about you? You were joyful yesterday, strange and aloof this morning, and now you're back to normal? Is there something wrong with your personality? Naruto's face was as expressionless as it had been all day when the nearly smile faded. Naruto muttered, almost too softly for anyone to hear, I have my reasons. Well, choose a side. Due to the fact that you passed the test despite the fact that no training records were discovered, you are strangely showing up here at the end of the year. Sasuke said, everything about you is suspicious. Something's up and I think you know exactly what it is. Naruto winced inwardly. He was unaware of his true proximity, but he chose not to show it by giving away his identity, regardless of what others said to convince him. Having said that, Sasuke turned off the road and went toward the Uchiha Manor, which was practically a ghost town, with a sense of death and betrayal that sent most people running. Sakura watched the boy leave, and when he was no longer visible, she went to speak with her other teammate, but she discovered that he was farther down the road, so she ran to catch up with him and skidded to a stop at his side. Hey, I appreciate that back there. Sakura smiled softly and said, it made me feel a lot better. Naruto looked at the road without answering, and Sakura sighed. I guess that was all he was going to say for the day. Or week. Who really knew? The two walked in silence for a few minutes before stopping in front of Sakura's house. The front room light was on, so it was likely that the girl's parents were still waiting for her, even though it was already close to 10. However, before the pink-haired girl approached her door, she turned. Sakura turned around and walked through the gate and up to the front door before Naruto could say anything. She said, I don't know why you're trying to hide it, and you might be fooling other people with your facade, but I can tell you have a heart somewhere in there. As she was about to open the door, she stole a glance backwards and discovered that Naruto had already left, passing like a faint wind. The apartment of Naruto. Naruto opened the door to his small apartment, tucking the keys into his pocket. He closed and locked the wooden door, though it wouldn't prove to be much protection if anyone tried to attack. He shuffled into the kitchen and absently pulled a cup of instant ramen off the shelf. Placing it over a low open flame, he sat down at the table, his eyes vacant. He thought he was doing good, keeping away from people. Some of the other genin teams had attempted to start a conversation with him earlier, but he had easily blown them off. But oddly, when it came down to his team, he just couldn't help saying something. He couldn't really explain it, and he didn't know why. It was really starting to vex him. After all the years of not caring for a single thing in the world besides Itachi's dream and his own, was he beginning to feel something for them too? After a few minutes of frustrating thought, he decided that it was just because they were so entertaining to mess with, that was all. But then, why had he tried to make Sakura feel better back on the walk home? He didn't actually want to connect with them, did he? He quickly shook himself away from that answer. Of course not. He had only wanted to piss Sasuke off, that was all. But even after all of that, it still didn't feel right. He made a final analysis that he just didn't want to deal with a 12-year-old soap opera after all of that good doing. And with that, the blonde fell asleep at the table, to smell of burning styro foam filling the room. 5 days later, the last 2 days were essentially the same as the first. Sasuke continued to play the emo, angry Avenger character he had made up for himself, Sakura, the fangirl who was shot down every night, and Naruto, who was kept at a distance from, well, everyone. Throughout the entire time, she had insisted that Naruto had a heart, but she hadn't heard from him since their first night together. When Kakashi arrived, on time for once, and told them to follow him, the team had gathered outside the Hokage's office for another day of D-rank missions. Now they were in the Hokage's briefing room, where the Sandaime, Iruka, and one of the council, Danzo, were seated across a long table, staring at them with a slight frown on their faces. Are they prepared for this, Kakashi, in your opinion? The old man, who was playing with a scroll in front of him, said. I mean, the graduated only a week ago. The one-eyed Junin nodded. I'm confident they can manage it. Furthermore, it's merely an escort. The attention of all three genin was drawn to this. A C-rank mission is what we're embarking on? Sakura asked, her voice bare with excitement, and Kakashi grinned. You see? The man continued, totally ready. Danzo and Iruka both looked horrified. But Hokage Sama, only a few days ago did they become shinobi. They're not quite ready for a C rank, in my opinion. Iruka objected. Iruka, you have no right to make that decision. The Sandaime responded. Kakashi is their teacher now, and if he feels that they're ready, then we have no place to argue. Iruka still appeared to want to disagree, sighing as he sat back in his chair, but Danzo had to express his thoughts on the matter. Respectfully, are you certain that we ought to allow Naruto to leave the village? The old man frowned and said Naruto's name as if it were the plague. The blonde saw this and gave the council member a sardonic grin, which made him frown even more. The Sandaime nodded. You make a valid point, but the boy has shown himself to be a formidable shinobi. The three genin were reveling in their happiness when the Hokage said, I think he deserves a little slack in that department, and they all deserve a break from the D-rank missions. His tone was firm, indicating that the decision was final, and Kakashi grinned slightly in victory before approaching the desk to get the mission details. Fantastic! Sakura exclaimed, I've never heard of genin getting C ranks this early in the game. Sasuke grinned and his eyes conveyed how much he enjoyed the thought, and even Naruto seemed a little excited about the experience. Kakashi then reappeared, tucking the scroll into his star pouch. Let's bring your client inside since he's currently outside. The Sandaime said merrily, nodding to the Anbu at the door. They bowed back and opened the door, allowing a figure to enter. He had shaggy gray hair, a face that was beginning to wrinkle with age, a mustache and beard that had faded in color, small glasses, and a fairly stocky build for an elderly man wearing simple workman's clothes. The man was holding a bottle of whiskey, which indicated that he had been drinking, and he narrowed his eyes as though he had trouble seeing the four despite their proximity. Are these the shinobi who are supposed to keep me safe on my way home? All they have are runts. He stumbled to where Naruto was standing and gave him a once-over after saying, in a slurred, drunken voice. This child isn't even worthy of serving as my armrest. Kakashi couldn't help but smile when he saw the man's face. How he loved his genin team. Naruto's jaw clenched and he grabbed a metal bar that was hanging from the man's belt. It was probably his weapon from the journey here. He bent it into a circle, looped it back on the man's belt, and crossed his arms over his chest without any strain or difficulty. The drunk's jaw dropped, and he nearly dropped his half-empty bottle. They will. The man retreated down the hall and said, meet me at the gate in an hour. Sakura burst out laughing as soon as the client was out of earshot, and even Sasuke grinned. The Sandaime was grinning, which was undoubtedly his favorite part of the day thus far. Well, you did hear him. Kakashi sighed as the three nodded and left the room to begin packing for the mission. 1 hour, and don't be late, he said. The Hokage said, interesting boy you've got there. The Junin grinned. Definitely one to keep a close watch on. The gates of Konoha. With the gates towering high behind them, the team left Konoha's boundaries. Their client, Tazuna, had not consumed any alcohol prior to their departure, and his previous inebriation had disappeared, returning to what they presumed to be his typical self, happy and amiable. While still wearing the metal ring on his belt and occasionally glancing at the blonde with doubt, as though he expected him to bend a tree in that way as well. 30 minutes after being on the road, they were traveling on a simple dirt path, carved out of the forest from years of travelers and traders. Kakashi and Tazuna were talking about random things, including the release date on some book called Icha Icha Paradise. Sasuke was playing with a shuriken, spinning it on his finger and throwing it into the air, trying to catch it without chopping off one of his fingers in the process. Sakura was taking in the pure scenery, her expression filled with awe and wonder, as if she had never been outside the village before, which might have been true. And last but not least, Naruto was just looking around nonchalantly, taking in everything at once. He was trying to point and identify certain sounds in the trees. It was an exercise Itachi had taught him on their travels so he could train while they walked. Now he was doing it for kicks, seeing how many different things he could find. It was during this that he saw a small puddle near his side of the road. his eyes darted around the rest of the area, observing the grass, trees, and sky. The grass was green yet slightly crunchy, meaning it hadn't been wet in a long time. Every step he took kicked up dust, meaning the ground was bone-dry, meaning there hadn't been rain for weeks. That puddle, then, wasn't your typical one. Naruto shot a glance at Kakashi and one look told the blonde that he knew too. The teen swiftly walked ahead and stopped at the edge, waiting, as if he had seen something and was now waiting for the rest of the group to catch up. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a hand reach out of the puddle, a kunai out, stretched and aimed at his leg. In on fluid, like motion, he caught the kunai in his foot and stuck it in tight. He winced slightly when he felt the blade break skin and he shuddered when it hit bone, but he didn't stop. He kicked upward, sending the hand's owner out of the puddle and across the path, landing in a heap on the other side. Instantly, his partner jumped up and the puddle vanished. By now, the rest of the team had run up and were ready, Tazuna safely behind Kakashi. Naruto knelt down and harshly ripped the knife out of his foot without a sound. Blood glistened from the tip to almost half-way to the handle, and the gaping hole in the blonde's foot was releasing a steady stream of the crimson liquid. The teen ignored the sting and threw the kunai away, hearing it clatter in the bushes. Sakura looked at him worriedly, but he didn't show any pain or discomfort, only concentration. The two metal-clad ninja were on their feet now, and with a whip of their arms, sent 4 long chains hurtling at them. Kakashi jumped in front and took it, the chains wrapping tightly around his body. But before he could make a move or even say a word, they constricted and sliced the Junin to bits. All 4 of the people's eyes widened as they watched the 26-year-old man killed right in front of them. After exchanging quick glances, Sasuke and Naruto nodded briskly, and the raven-haired boy ran for the first one, kunai drawn. Naruto turned back to Sakura, who was still looking in horror at the spot where Kakashi had been just a second before. "Sakura, keep Tazuna safe," he muttered. The girl nodded and Naruto rushed into the fight, heading for the second one. With a quick look, he could see that Sasuke was holding up pretty well on his end, which was good news for him. Now he only had to worry about his opponent. He jumped into the air, dodging a punch the man had thrown at him. It connected with the ground and the earth split, a crater forming around where the ninja's hand had hit. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Note to self: look out for inhuman strength. He flipped from his aerial assault into a bone-breaking round house kick. It made contact with the man's face, who was surprised that a 12-year-old would make a full front attack. The blow sent him stumbling backwards, his arms flailing to keep balance. Naruto didn't pause for him to regain his stature. He landed and stayed close to the ground, coming up and pushing off, hitting the enemy ninja right under the jaw. His head snapped back, a little trickle of blood coming from the corner of his mouth. The blonde kept up with his flight and tucked in, neatly flipping over the man's body. He landed behind him, got a good grasp on the straps of leather holding his metal armor together, and with chakra-enhanced strength, threw him toward the other shinobi. Sasuke hit the deck. They both threw out a stance and waited, standing between Tazuna and where they had landed. After a few seconds, one of them burst out of the trees, his metal-encased fist outstretched, and Sasuke charged to meet him, but Naruto stopped short. There were 2 of them. Where did the other one go? Naruto yelled. The Uchiha struck the ground just as the Rouge collided with his friend, sending them both into the tree line behind them. Reality hit him, and his eyes widened. He whirled around in time to see the second one come out of the trees a few yards down from where the first one had emerged, though this one's target was different. He was headed straight towards Sakura and Tazuna. The pink-haired girl raised a kunai in defense and her emerald eye glowed with ferociousness. She was ready to fight, but Naruto knew better. He had just been fighting this guy and he knew that with the speed he was getting plus the factors of his freakish strength and heavy metal armor, it would make a deathly hit if you took it full on. And she didn't look like she was going to move. Naruto didn't even think, he just moved. He poured a hell of a lot of speed into his feet at that moment. He knew he'd pay for it later, but he wasn't just going to stand by and watch her get killed. The Rouge raised his arm, a small dagger appearing from an opening in his fist. And just as he started to slam down, Naruto skidded to a stop in front of Sakura and Tazuna, with no time to prepare a counter or defense. The blonde's hand was slicked by the Rouge's armed hand, which smashed down and went straight through the middle of the teen's palm. It only managed to burrow itself through the arm, all the way up to the handle, rather than passing through the other side of his hand. The pain of the blade caused Naruto to grimace a little, but he didn't give it much more thought. Sakura appeared to have finally come to terms with what had happened behind him. Blood was streaming freely down the boy's arm and hand as she stared in horror. It quickly formed a tiny pool as it dripped onto the ground. Sasuke's gaze expanded. The teenager was practically bleeding to death, even though he had never seen him get even a scratch. Moving closer, Sakura whispered, "Naruto. Oh God, are you okay?" Before she could continue, however, Naruto pushed her back with his other hand, not violently, but firmly enough to say, "Stay." His eyes were a deadly blue, not the dull sapphire they usually were, and his teeth were gritted in anger. "He's my fight. Stay back with Tazuna," Naruto commanded, launching himself back into action. The blade tore from his hand as he violently withdrew from the ninja. In addition to making the wound bleed more heavily, the sound was nauseating in and of itself. However, the teenager rushed into the altercation without even pausing to examine it. The other Rouge was already unconscious and bound tightly with wires over by Sasuke. The Uchiha observed the conflict with composure. Especially with someone as dangerous as Naruto, he knew better than to interfere. Encouraged with a fury as great as Konoha itself, who could have known how bad he was? Naruto ran so quickly that you would have missed it if you had blinked. He immediately took advantage of his momentum, leaping into the air and spinning around before round, house-kicking the man in the face with a chakra enhanced foot. The shinobi was hurled backwards, nearly separating its upper and lower halves as it struck and broke a tree. Naruto didn't even wait for his opponent to hold onto his feet. Without saying a word, he swung around on his heel and flung him across the clearing after attacking once more and grabbing him by the front of his shirt. With a whoosh, the air rushed out of the man's lungs as his body landed heavily. With just his arm supporting his weight, he picked himself up halfway off the ground and rolled to a stop nearly 10 feet from where he had landed. A mouthful of blood came out of his cough. Slowly approaching him, Naruto narrowed his eyes as if he was lost in thought. The Rouge turned and whimpered as he saw his assailant coming, the fire visible in his eyes. He spoke quickly and his eyes darted around, searching for a way out. "Please man, go easy. It wasn't our idea to attack you guys. If we had known they had such a powerhouse traveling with them, we wouldn't have done it, I swear," he said. Just a few feet from where the ninja were trembling, Naruto came to a halt. His forehead creased, and a mildly intrigued expression appeared on his face. The teenager questioned, "If it wasn't your notion, then whose was it?" The shinobi immediately displayed remorse. He had spoken something inappropriately. The ninja recoiled as Naruto took a step closer. Naruto repeated the question in a firm and demanding tone. "Who hired you to take out the old man?" The man appeared uncertain, but not unwilling, as he swallowed. He would probably tell them anything as long as he didn't have to face the badass genin again. He appeared to be about to lose it, but then he sneered. He sprang to his feet and made a high jump over the blonde's head. He rushed to his companion, grabbed him, and fled to the safety of the forest line. It was undoubtedly his escape route. Naruto muttered an expletive. Running at a slow pace for him but still quick enough for a typical genin, Naruto assured him he won't be getting far. However, a hand restrained him before he could go far enough. He turned around, prepared to kill its owner, but his defenses were halted when he realized who had stopped him. Sakura's gentle eyes gazed back at him. She gripped his arm tighter and said, "Just let them go. I don't think they'll bother us again." Naruto let out a deep breath. He could easily dismiss her and pursue them. However, if he had just seriously hurt the person he had just saved, what would have been the purpose of the huge hole in his hand? In addition, he found it hard to accept that he had done that. She didn't deserve to be eliminated from the game so quickly, even though he hadn't wanted her to die. But to leap ahead of an approaching assault? To protect her? To take the hit for her? That was something good people did, something heroic. But wasn't he cold and harsh, heartless, and merciless? Naruto shook himself free of the thoughts racing through his mind. He had no time to dwell on such things at this time. To be critical of himself for the wild thing, he would simply have to wait until later. However, he was curious about Master Itachi's reaction upon learning the truth. He fervently prayed that he wouldn't. That wouldn't be attractive. A voice from the other side of the tree line said, "Huh, well it looks like I didn't need to interfere after all." When the four turned around, they saw Kakashi emerge from the shadows with what they could only assume was a smile on his face. Sakura's mouth fell open, and even Sasuke appeared somewhat taken aback. Had he not died and become a heap of ribbons? Sakura said, "Kakashi. Sensei, what's going on?" Sasuke approached to join them, seemingly searching for an explanation for what had just transpired as his coal eyes searched the world at 1,000,000 miles per hour. Kakashi put his hands behind his head and grinned sheepishly. I wanted to see how you'd react in a situation where your sensei had just been killed right in front of you. If you'd been completely lost, if you'd last more than a minute, or if you would survive, in great and incredible ways, he said. He gave Sasuke a quick look. Like you, for instance. You did great on the way you took out that Rouge, using his weak points as your heaviest attack spots. The idea of jamming kunai up into the connection lines between their armor was a great idea. Good to think on your feet. He turned to Sakura now, his eyes evaluating. Even though a great and horrifying tragedy had just occurred in front of you, you responded to orders and listened to them, doing an excellent job at them too. You stood your ground when faced with an oncoming attacker, willing to give your life to protect our client. It takes guts to do that, and I am very impressed. A lot of people would have run if faced with the same situation, but you held. Very remarkable, he said, and the pink-haired Kunoichi finally, he looked at Naruto. And now outsmart. Alec, split personality, mysterious member of the team, began Kakashi. Naruto grinned a little. His eyes glowed softly with what might have been laughter as he muttered, "Well, don't I feel loved with that opening statement?" Or perhaps he was still a little angry about the big cut the Rouge had just gotten in his hand. The last one, probably. You have been extremely tense these past few days, distanced from the rest of humanity, trying not to connect with anyone at all. Frankly, I don't really know why. And you never will. Naruto interrupted the Junin with a low mumble. With a sigh, Kakashi went on. But when someone on your team needed you, or if you needed to step up to the plate, you were all over it. I saw what happened when that Rouge tried to take out Sakura and the bridge builder. Taking a hit like that, he said, pointing to Naruto's tightly wound, takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to be able to fight like that afterward. You are definitely a mystery, but an interesting one at that, Kakashi said with a grin. Naturally, Naruto didn't reciprocate, but his azure eyes appeared to be filled with more than just boredom right now. Everyone could see the joy and contentment that were pulsing through them in response to the remark he had just received. Kakashi now focused on the bridge builder, who at the moment had a somewhat guilty expression. Those were at least Chunin, maybe even special Junin. Either way, they were way too highly skilled for a low C rank mission. Maybe there's something you'd better tell us, Kakashi said, his eyes narrowing. Tazuna let out a sigh. I'm a bridge builder for a town of the coast of the Wave Country. We've been building a bridge that would connect with the Fire Country's nearest shore, being able to bring in more trade. But soon after we started, a man named Gato sent a lot of thugs to threaten us to stop the process. He had supplied the town with their supplies for a long while, but his prices were rising and the number and quality was dropping just as fast. Soon, everything has at least tripled in price, but there is barely enough to go around. I know if we can just finish the bridge, then we could stop relying on Gato for survival. But he's not too happy about that. So when I left town for a trading trip, he must have found it the perfect opportunity to just kill me off completely. If I die, the whole bridge goes under. Tazuna spoke with a grave tone. Kakashi nodded. He had been on a mission out near the Wave Country border recently and had heard tidbits of conversation like this. Well, this mission is still way too out of range for my team, and you only paid for a C rank, Kakashi stated. In response, the bridge builder muttered, I only have enough for a C rank. Still, the fact that they were Chunin and the fact that there will most likely be more, that bumps it up to a B rank, which Genin aren't qualified for. Kakashi replied. Naruto took the initiative because, well, that's what he's been doing a lot of lately. Naruto said more in one sentence than he had since arriving. So, we're just going to abandon him in the middle of the woods while bunches of high-class shinobi are after him. What kind of ninja would we be if we did that? Surprisingly, his voice was filled with emotion. We can't do that, Kakashi. Sensei, no matter how hard the mission is. Sakura said. Sasuke simply nodded in agreement. It would be an understatement to say that Kakashi was taken aback. He was blown away. However, at least 2 members of his team demonstrated exceptional teamwork on the bell test. And just a short while ago, they showed off what the majority of ninja didn't develop until much later in the game. And for the majority, they would never get that far. Well then, it's your choice. Do you want to continue on or turn back? Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke looked at each other and all nodded. Naruto sighed and tossed his pack on the ground as soon as Kakashi was removed, saying, we better get moving then before more of them pour out of the trees. After that, the group left. Tazuna and Kakashi were strolling up front while discussing the bridge and the attackers of the previous 2 weeks. As usual, Sasuke was walking alone and gazing either at his feet or straight ahead. After attempting to strike up a conversation with him for 10 minutes or so without saying a word, Sakura moved to the side and remained silent the entire time. Naruto trailed behind and turned around every few minutes. The feeling that this wasn't quite over still troubled him. He reasoned that it would be best to keep his eyes open because Itachi's plan might end there if what he had anticipated happened. Sakura saw the boy halt, looking around the trees, his narrowed, inquisitive eyes. She moved to stand beside him after falling back from the group. She said, "What are you doing?" Naruto continued searching the shadows as if it were his job, not even looking at her. He answered absently, "Nothing," and resumed walking. Sakura danced lightly beside him, her eye resting on his right hand. The blood flow had significantly slowed, now only a tiny trickle, with a drop appearing roughly every 50 feet. Still in shock that he had done that for her, Sakura leapt to her defense and took the blow that would have likely killed her. When Naruto noticed that she was staring, he followed her eyes to his open hand. "I could take care of that for you. I've picked up a little medical stuff from my mom," Sakura replied. Though he didn't look directly at the girl, Naruto gave her a sidelong glance. Naruto answered, "Nah, it'll be fine on its own." He was well aware that if he left it exposed and untreated for an extended period of time, it would probably become infected and weaken him, which would not be good. A run.in with his enemy. Kindness, however, was not something he wanted to risk. Sakura frowned. She pulled him to the side of the road and said, "Liar. You know just as much as I do that it's bad, you're just too macho to admit it." "Fine, I'll do it as an act of gratitude, that way you didn't even ask for it." Examining the hole, she cautiously held the outside of his hand. As Naruto observed her at work, he noticed how carefully and gently she handled him, as if she truly cared. "Put an end to that. Don't even begin. You differ from everyone else too much. Like the rest of the village, they would despise you if they knew who you were. You chose to cut off all emotions years ago for that reason. Just because you're surprised by the kindness you believe you're receiving doesn't mean that all of your training should be abandoned. Recall Master Itachi's advice to maintain your distance. They'd never comprehend." Sakura had cleaned and bandaged Naruto's hand while he was talking to himself. After carefully taping the final end into position, she grinned with satisfaction at her accomplishment. The boy let go of her hand and dropped it to his side, his face forced but expressionless. Or perhaps she was dreaming. He muttered, "Thanks," and sounded sincere. The two resumed their walk, putting in a little more effort to catch up to their client and teammates who were backing away. "Well, here goes nothing," Sakura sighed. Sakura muttered, "Thanks for that back there. That could have ended up bad." Naruto gave a shrug. Softly, he answered, "Couldn't let you die, right?" Sakura grinned. The kunoichi insisted, smiling, "I don't think so. You say you don't have a heart and that you don't care, but it's obvious you do." Naruto gave her a disbelieving glance. He retorted mockingly, "Really? Right, and Sasuke is actually a happy, loving person." Sakura laughed, and Naruto gave a small smirk, but as soon as it appeared, he wiped it from his face. "You can't fool me. First you helped me get the bells back at the field. Then you cheered me up when we were walking home the other night, and today you saved me from my death," Sakura said. Naruto grimaced to himself. Who knew he had accomplished so much? Now he would never hear the end of it. Naruto retorted, "Doing all that stuff is natural for humans." Sakura gave a nod. "True, but you keep trying to keep your distance from all the people in the village like they hate you or something." Fortunately, Naruto didn't notice her flinch when she said this. "You say you don't have any emotions and that you don't have a heart for anyone of anything. Yet when someone's in trouble, you just can't not help them," she continued. Naruto let out a sigh. It was just his old emotions attempting to resurface and take charge. He wasn't foolish, though, because that wouldn't occur. Never. The blonde responded, "Slip up. I can promise you, it won't happen again." His tone was firm but slightly uncertain. He had to try to suppress those old emotions, even though he wasn't sure if he could. It was essential to Itachi's plan. It was essential to his dream. "I doubt it. You'll do it again because though you won't admit it, you have emotions. For some reason though, you're holding yourself back, trying to detach yourself from life in all ways. And I don't know as of yet, but I'll figure it out eventually," said Sakura. "Yes," Naruto rolled his eyes. "I wish you luck on that one. And when I do, I'll help you out of it." This caused the teen's eyes to widen, and his face was swept with shock. She had vowed to assist him in resolving his current predicament. She hardly knew him, and that was big talk. Her sincere concern in her voice somehow convinced him that she was telling the truth, even though it had to be too good to be true. And that only strengthened his resolve to keep the truth from her. The blonde reassured, trying to sound as convincing as possible, "Look, there's nothing going on, nothing to worry about. I simply think that emotions hold a ninja back, so I got rid of them. Easy as that. Nothing to help with. She just looked at him inquisitively for a few seconds before lowering her eyes. She muttered, "Okay, if you're sure about that." Naruto gave a nod, relieved that the discussion was over. After a minute or so of walking in silence, Sakura's eyes glowed with insight. She said, "What did you mean natural for humans? You say it like you're not." Naruto nearly stopped in his tracks, but he wisely continued to move at a steady pace without even faltering. He grinned to himself. He was a pleasant man. Realizing that he was confronted with a question for which he had no answer at all, he returned to reality. He found himself in a corner. But he was about to speak when he noticed a glint from above. Sakura was knocked to the ground as he abruptly flashed to the side after looking up. Dust kicking up, he rolled down beside her. Sakura gave him a fierce glare as she turned to face him. She was about to scold him for flinging her to the ground when he started to move again, pulling her up with him. She could see Kakashi and Sasuke encircling Tazuna with their kunai drawn up ahead. Sakura's back was roughly 3 feet from a tree when Naruto backed up and whipped the girl behind him. A 6-foot sword was also buried halfway into the tree's trunk. When she understood why Naruto had shoved her onto the road, her eyes widened. The blonde would have been decapitated if she hadn't noticed and taken action when the blade was thrown at them. The emotionless, heartless boy had saved her life for the second time in a single day. With his sapphire eyes darting around, taking in everything at once, Naruto raised his arms in a defensive stance. His muscles were coiled, and his hands were clenching and unclenching into fists. He looked back at the girl with the pink hair. He continued to watch the trees where the sword had first appeared and asked, "Are you okay? Or did I hurt you too bad from that tackle?" Sakura gave a nod. Her voice trembled a little as she replied, "Yeah. Scared the crap out of me, but fine. What's going on?" Naruto tightened his jaw. With poison leaking from his mouth, he answered, "Something I really don't want to deal with right now," as if he knew who was approaching. Sakura opened her mouth to ask him what he was talking about, but a figure emerged from the forest before she could finish her sentence. He headed straight for Naruto and Sakura, ignoring Kakashi, Sasuke, and Tazuna. The girl tasted blood when she bit her lip. Before then, the man was terrifying in every way. He was tall, with nearly all of his face, from nose to mouth, covered in bandages. He had dull, icy, charcoal black eyes. He exuded a sense of unadulterated murderous intent, with absolutely no mercy in his disposition. He was the epitome of a murderous machine. He was now directly pursuing them. The sound echoed in Sakura's ears like a pounding drum roll, and her heart rate accelerated to an unpredictable pace. She had only seen this man once, but already she was afraid. The color left her face and she felt a tremor in her knees. Naruto believed he heard a tooth crack as he clenched his teeth together. His senses instantly went into overdrive as his muscles stiffened. Nothing was undervalued. Every tiny movement was observed. The man gave the blonde a chilly smirk. The ninja's harsh, icy voice sent chills down everyone's spines as he said, "It's been a long time since they last saw Naruto. It's been far too long. Well, isn't this just a heart-warming reunion?" Except for Naruto, who remained motionless, his eyes unblinking, and as solid as stone. "Can't say I'm happy to see you, Zabuza," was the blonde's hushed response. Sakura gave her teammate in front of her a nervous glance. Her voice trembled a little as she said, "Naruto, do you know him?" All the blonde could do was clench his jaw and ball his fists, the knuckles turning ghostly white with effort. Totally disregarding the first question, Naruto mumbled back, "Go by Kakashi and Sasuke, protect Tazuna." The girl with the pink hair managed to snort. She said, startled by the resolute tone of her voice, "And leave you here by yourself? Please." Naruto let out a sigh. The teenager shot back, his cerulean eyes hard and immobile, "Listen to me. I have a better chance of lasting against him without having to worry about keeping you out of harm's way. Do me a favor and go." Zabuza moved, disappearing in a black streak as the girl opened her mouth to continue the argument. His speed was uncanny as he reappeared between the two with his sword. He ripped the weapon from the tree and swung it around, intending to strike them so that their heads would be severed from their bodies. The dark gray rapier gleamed in the sunlight as Naruto shoved Sakura aside and slid his own blade out of its sheath. The shrill sound of metal hitting metal reverberated throughout the clearing as he raised his arm. When the blades made contact, Naruto slid back a few inches. Zabuza's sword was a few notches superior to his due to its size and density. He certainly wasn't giving up, though. Naruto turned his head and looked in the direction of Kakashi and the others. he was pleased to see that the girl had heeded his counsel and returned to the Konoha squad. The Junin leader's eyes narrowed in suspicion as she whispered something to him, and his gaze wavered toward them. Great, Naruto sighed. His cover is gone. When Zabuza's blade cleaved down on his right side, it buried itself in the ground and missed him by just a few inches, bringing his thoughts back to the battle. About a foot from the spot where the weapon had shattered the earth's crust, Naruto deftly landed after untucking his body and sliding into a back-hand spring. Zabuza's steely eyes narrowed as he moved once more. He went through a string of seals and slammed his sword back behind his back. Sweeten. Hanryu. With a deep voice, the shinobi cried. Too swift, bone. Crushing streams of rushing water erupted from his palms as he straightened them. Because of Itachi's limitations, Naruto was unable to counter it in any way, so he gritted his teeth and sheathed his blade as well. He just rolled out of the way and slipped flexibly to the ground, avoiding the water entirely, or so he believed. The mist shinobi veered off course and redirected them toward Naruto. When the blonde put his hands firmly on the ground, the white water doubled in speed and slammed into him with tremendous force, just as he was about to jump off the ground and out of danger. The wind rushed out of his lungs in a whoosh as he was thrown back and smashed into the base of a tree. Naruto picked himself up off the ground and coughed up a mouthful of water as Zabuza started to advance. Kakashi extended a hand to restrain Sasuke as he made a move toward the blonde. The Uchiha gave him a questioning look. With his gaze fixed on the fight, Kakashi declared, "He's too high class for any of you, including Naruto. I'm going to jump in as soon as I see an opening and get him out of there." A glint of sunlight reflected off the enormous sword that was being brought down upon Naruto just as he wiped the tears from his eyes. Just as the blade made contact with the bark where his back had been, the teenager rolled out of the way. The enormous tree groaned in response as it sliced through the dense base. Some of the larger chucks dug themselves into the ground, sending splinters of wood flying in all directions. Back. Pedaling away from the missing nin, Naruto transitioned from his roll into a run. Zabuza grinned icily and turned on him once more. With his teeth shining, he said aloud, "You've improved some. I wonder what he's been teaching you." Naruto muttered a curse. He needed to tend to him before disclosing any information about his master. Zabuza recited, "Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu," while creating a seal in the middle of his chest. With the same ominous grins, 5 water clones emerged from the earth and assumed the shape of Zabuza. He waved his hand, and everyone sprinted toward Naruto with their swords out. Naruto groaned. Although he had previously dealt with water clones without incident, he wasn't quite so sure at the moment due to his limitations and the enigmatic way his power appeared to be leaking from his body. Nevertheless, he pulled out his sword, prepared to fight. Little sparks flew from the points where the blonde and all 5 weapons collided. Naruto's arms trembled a little as his strength faltered under the impact. All of the clones grinned, and 2 of them separated to strike him on either side. Naruto jumped as his eyes flashed and a black streak appeared. Naruto landed in the middle, where all 5 blades crossed, after they crashed into one another. With skill, he flipped over their heads and started back toward the tree line. However, a fist struck the side of his head while he was still in midair, instantly propelling him across the field. He struck a big rock, causing a crack that made the 3 Konoha ninja flinch. With the stone smashed into the back of his skull, Naruto's head exploded with pain as he opened his eyes. His vision was blurry, but he could see the 5 clones melting to the ground, still grinning. This implied that the actual Zabuza had relocated. Just a second after the boy's impact, Zabuza was at his side once more, giving him a hard side kick. Naruto repeatedly rolled as he skidded across the ground. However, the ninja had not yet finished with him. Flashing over, the man brandished his sword. Like he was playing golf, he struck him in the side once more with the butt of his sword. Kakashi's body was ripped and covered in blood when Naruto finally rolled to a stop at his feet. The 4, still in shock over what had transpired, could only look at their teammate in horror. Pushing himself to a sitting position, Naruto wiped the line of blood dripping from his mouth with the back of his hand along the right side of his jaw. He forced himself into a stand and muttered to himself, "This is impossible." When he took a step forward, back toward Zabuza, the rest of the team was startled out of their reverie. Sasuke moved in front of him, his onyx gaze hard and immobile, and Sakura grabbed his arm, being careful not to touch the areas where he had been cut. With one eye closely observing him, Kakashi shifted to his opposite side. "Naruto, stop. You can't keep going like this, he's just too much, even for you," he whispered. He knew he could take him, so the blonde gritted his teeth. What the devil was wrong now? He had before, However, Kakashi was correct. He felt even more helpless than he had just a moment before. He relaxed reluctantly and sank back toward Tazuna. After a collective sigh of relief, Kakashi turned to face Sakura and Sasuke. He looked briefly at Naruto before saying, "Sasuke, protect Tazuna. He's Zabuza's target to begin with, regardless of what history Naruto and him may have. Sakura, you'll be able to heal some of Naruto's wounds, though I don't doubt that we'll have to stop in the port and find a doctor to get him fully patched up," he said. With a nod of agreement, the two went to their separate positions, Sakura beside Naruto and Sasuke in front of Tazuna. Kakashi turned to face the ninja who had gone missing, who was observing them with a smirk of some amusement. Kakashi snarled and pulled a kunai out of his holster, saying, "You're my opponent now." Zabuza also drew his blade, grinning. Sakura looked up from her workstation. She gently reminded him, "Don't let him cast that attack on you." Their sensei merely gave a nod before rushing into the altercation. Naruto gave her a questioning glance. "It was, attack," he said. Sakura scowled. "I guess you were too focused on something else. You should have felt it coming. He cast an attack that would steal all of your strength and give it to his body during a fight," she said. Naruto's gaze expanded. That clarified it. He recalled the time he had met them on the road with Itachi. In the woods, he remembered, they stayed the night together and exchanged information about their respective origins. Zabuza claimed to have been developing a jutsu that would drain his opponent's power from their beings and transfer it to him. He gave himself a mental slap for not considering that as soon as he sensed his strength ebbing. Examining the fight, he looked away from the working girl. Kakashi had to acknowledge his skill. He was incredibly fast, and his moves were smooth and powerful, which Naruto was still unable to combine to create infallible formations. Like a lethal viper biting and pulsing away before the enemy could kill him, his attacks were powerful and swift. Perhaps Konoha wasn't entirely awful. Kakashi turned his head away, his coal black eyes focused. He leapt out into the open water and landed on the water's surface almost silently. Naruto squinted his eyes. Walking on water was something he had always wanted to know. However, Itachi had consistently stated that it was a waste of time and would not help him achieve his goal. He still wished he had the answer. In the middle of his run, Zabuza paused and grinned. He knelt down and quickly followed Kakashi, creating a swift line of seals. When Zabuza exclaimed, "Suiru no Jutsu," Kakashi's eyes grew wide. The water surrounding him rose and fell, encircling the shinobi like a sphere, before he could even attempt to move. Internally, Kakashi cursed himself for being so foolish as to venture directly into the water, a situation in which Zabuza was an expert. With a sly smile, Zabuza made another water clone with his free hand. In front of the two Junin, the copy Zabuza emerged from a bulge in the water, his evil gleam aimed straight at the bridge builder and the genin. His eyes were cold and full of murderous intent as he grew to his full height and started to stalk slowly in their direction. With a look of panic, Kakashi turned to face his team. "Run. Just because it's a water clone doesn't mean that he doesn't have Zabuza's strength. Take the bridge builder and get out of here. Leave me," he yelled. Sakura, Naruto, and Sasuke looked at each other and spoke with ease. Their faces remained steady as they turned back to their client. He let out a sigh. He responded to their silent request by saying, "I need to repent for putting us in this predicament. Do whatever it takes to save your sensei." Sakura reluctantly observed Naruto as he got up and walked beside Sasuke. Sasuke and Naruto exchanged identical glances and grinned. "This will be enjoyable," Sasuke said. Zabuza grinned, but his smile quickly turned into a loud laugh. The two chuckles bounded off the woods and blended into an echoing ring as the clone mimicked his response. Naruto's jaw tightened. He detested being made fun of. With a tone of laughter, the mist shinobi questioned, "Do you really think that you, two genin, can stop me?" Naruto remained silent and stood calmly without responding. Sasuke folded his arms tightly across his chest, adopting his posture. With his onyx eyes staring into the Rouge's head, the Uchiha said, "Honestly, I don't think you're that high and mighty as you point out to be. You're just hiding how weak and pathetic you truly are." Sakura exclaimed, her emerald eyes taking on a dreamlike quality. "Sasuke is so cool. Fan. Girls." Naruto rolled his eyes. He was unable to tolerate them. "But you have so many of your own." Itachi would always laugh when he said this. Naruto sneered to himself at this recollection. When they were walking through a town, his master told him that at least one girl's eye was on him. However, that didn't mean they weren't incredibly annoying. The Junin's one eyes were fixed on his students as the real Zabuza looked at his captive. After grinning, and not in a nice way, he yelled, "Kill them all." Without hesitation, the clone reacted by hurling himself at the four. The two teenage boys, however, were by no means idiots. With each thumping step, Sasuke's dust rose in plume clouds as he ran to meet the water bushin. In order to protect Tazuna and his pink-haired teammate, Naruto hung back and assumed a protective stance. The real Zabuza grinned once more. They had abandoned their teammate to fight his clone alone and die alone. They really were ruthless genin. Sasuke made a smart initial move by thrusting a jab at the Junin's neck. Not a surprising one, though. In a single fluid motion, Zabuza's clone effortlessly blocked. The boy went into a spiral spin after he grabbed him by the ankle and twisted violently. However, Sasuke capitalized on this momentum and returned, turning and striking the clone in the mid-back with a startling blow. The ninja staggered forward, his hold on the Uchiha releasing enough to allow him to rip his leg off. The moment his shoes' soles touched the ground, the teenager with the raven hair landed gently, his arms up in defense. With his bandages facing down, the clone whirled around, most likely frowning. They had no real idea. In a solemn tone, Zabuza's clone murmured, "Not bad, for a rookie. But you still lack the blood lust, the empty-heartedness, that's needed to be a true shinobi." Sasuke's gaze grew strained. "I have plenty heartlessness. I have no problem killing your user over there right in his place," said the Uchiha. The Bushin of Zabuza laughed. "Yes, I can see the hatred in you, the pure murderous intent that seeps from your gaze when you look at me. But is it really how you are, or is just your training telling you to act tough?" The man answered with a snicker. Sasuke's teeth were exposed. The Uchiha screamed back, "I am a relentless killer. I'll draw as much blood as I want." Instead, Zabuza grinned. "And do you have a goal that makes you like this? A reason that you want blood shed? That's not true power, that's only your fate, pushing you along for the ride." By this point, Sasuke was on the verge of a hysteric, his eyes flashing dangerously, a glimmer of red in the black. His knuckles were whitened and his fists were clenched and trembling. Sakura slowly shifted from her spot in front of Tazuna. Shakily making her way to her teammate a short distance away, she approached him cautiously while maintaining a jade gaze on him. With a low voice full of worry, she whispered, "Sasuke, calm down." The teenager's rage was boiling over, and he pretended not to have heard her. In an effort to control the boy's emotions, the girl with the pink hair gently put her arm around his wrist. However, it made no difference at all. And nobody would have anticipated the response. His eyes widened a little as her hand touched his arm, and he swung out, clipping her upper cheek with his right hand. Unfortunately, at the time of his attack, he was also holding a kunai in the same hand. Naruto, just a short while before, holding him on the lake, the blonde reappeared on the water, a clone below. He almost grinned as he looked back toward the land. Nobody had seen anything. A clone had been made in seconds, streaked out to the water's surface, and vanished into the adjacent forest line. Kakashi was unaware of what had transpired. About an eighth of a mile from where he was now, it still appeared as though he and Sakura were protecting Tazuna. Only Sasuke was aware of his scheme to sneak out behind the real Zabuza and eliminate him in order to free their sensei, but he never explained how. The only thing the Uchiha had to worry about was how he was going to distract the clone. With light, silent footsteps, Naruto began to approach. Only twice in a minute did his clone's head rise for air as it swam steadily along beneath him. In less than 3 minutes, the blonde, who was still invisible, was within 5 feet of the two renowned Junin. This was too simple, Naruto smirked. His eyes darted to his teammates, but he paused when he noticed Sakura approaching Sasuke, who was standing motionless just a meter from the clone, slowly. With furrowed brows, Naruto asked himself, what the hell was going on? He saw Sakura gently take hold of the teenager's wrist while mouthing some unspoken words to the boy with the raven hair. However, the Uchiha reacted before the blonde could even think again, slashing out at her with a kunai and causing a gouge to appear across her cheek. Sakura's hand flew up to the already bleeding wound as she recoiled. Naruto simply moved without pausing to consider his options. He kicked Zabuza in the back with such force that he flew across the room. He smashed straight into Sasuke after clearing the coastline, sending them both falling to the ground in a tangled heap. The Junin it contained was soaked when the water imprisonment dropped from its spherical shape. When Kakashi turned around and saw Naruto standing next to him, his eyes widened even more. However, the blonde didn't wait for a thank you before approaching Sakura, who was sitting on the ground and still gazing at Sasuke with wide eyes. With little success, the boy was pushing at the shinobi's lug that was stretched out on top of him. With his gaze fixed on the Uchiha, Naruto knelt beside the girl with the pink hair. He asked hazily, "You okay?" in a direct and concise manner. Sakura gave him a quick glance and started to say something, but she stopped. She turned to face Tazuna and the clone still watching over him. Confusion filled her eyes when she looked back into his, but the hurt from just a moment before was still there. Her voice was quiet as she asked, "How are you here, and there?" Naruto gave a slight smirk. He explained, carefully pronouncing the Uchiha's name, Shadow Clone. Very useful for the tactic me and Sasuke had planned out. Sakura glanced back at the dark-eyed boy and nodded in comprehension, her fingers idly stroking the wound. With a sigh, Naruto carefully withdrew the girl's hand. Although it wasn't deep enough to have hurt a muscle or bone, the wound was fairly good. A significant amount of the red fluid was on the ground and smeared on Sakura's hand, and blood was streaming freely from the 2-inch-long wound. In an attempt to remove the remaining blood from the cut, the blonde carefully ran his finger over it, simply to determine what had to be done. He heard Sasuke grunt with effort as he attempted once more to push off the big man who was pinning him to the ground, and his teeth tightened. It was infuriating, and he was still in shock that Sasuke had actually attacked Sakura. Anger welled up inside of him, but he didn't give it much thought. His expression was intense as he dragged his thumb along the raised line. To his surprise, though, the slash vanished as soon as his finger left her face. All that was left was the blood that had been drying around it. Sakura's hand shot up to her face once more as she gasped. She looked at the blonde next to her in amazement. She said, How did you do that?" With his gaze fixed on his hand, Naruto shook his head blankly. He answered in a quiet, astonished voice, "I don't know." Although he had never tried, he had never been able to accomplish that. He was startled out of his reverie by the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. The sight of the raven-haired Uchiha bending down on his right made his jaw tighten. Zabuza was still a few feet away, groaning a little as he began to recover. Sasuke's eyes were wide and horrifying, his charcoal gaze fixed on the area where the cut had been seconds before and was now healed. Slowly, he reached for her, but his hand fell back to his side as Sakura recoiled. "Suffice it to say, Sakura, I'm so, Sasuke's voice trailed off in awe. The Kunoichi didn't even look at him, let alone answer. Her sea-green eyes were thoughtful, and she simply kept her head down. With a sigh, Naruto got to his feet. As usual, his cerulean gaze was emotionless and blank as he approached the spot where Zabuza lay. Initially, he simply stood at the side of the fallen man, cold. Deep in thought, he continued to clench and unclench his fists while tilting his head slightly to the side. He reached slowly up to his back, his hand firmly gripping the jet-black hilt. The point of it hovered over the Rouge's beating heart as he held it in front of him after effortlessly sliding it out of its sheath. He was going to kill Zabuza, right here, right now, and his four friends went into shock. 3 senbon flew from a nearby tree as Naruto was about to thrust upward and embed his blade in the man's back. They struck a major artery in Zabuza's neck, sinking about 0.5 inches. With his eyes still open in shock, the Rouge gave a little grunt before he fell limp. Not only was he stunned, but Naruto also let a glimmer of emotion pass through, his forehead furrowing in perplexity. A young girl wearing a mask completely covered her face fell silently at the base of the tree from the direction the projectiles were thrown. The shroud was straightforward. Only 2 slivers of red swirled in from the lower right corner of the entirely white background. Her long black hair appropriately framed the mask, and the eyes curled up for a feminine appearance. The symbol for the Mist Country was placed on the forehead. She wore an oversized navy blue robe over a plain gray turtleneck, but nothing special. Her loose blue-green trousers ended just below the knee, and a blood-red sash was tied at the waist. She had been traveling for some time, judging by his rough appearance. She came stealthily, without a word, without taking off her disguise. The shinobi kept a close eye on her as Sakura returned subtly to her guard in front of Tazuna. She took out her senbon and put them back in a pocket as the mist ninja crouched beside the deceased man. She looked up, or at least that's how it appeared because it was hard to see what she was doing because of the mask. "I'm sorry if I frightened you, but I heard a commotion a long ways away. As an Anbu, it's my duty to investigate suspicious behavior," she said in a low voice. Kakashi responded by nodding. He was familiar with the guidelines because he had previously been an Anbu. The Kunoichi let out a sigh. "Well, it's a good thing I did hear you. The village hidden in the mist has been looking for him for a very long time. My captain will be glad to know he's finally been disposed of," she continued. Naruto squinted his eyes. His eyes never left the Anbu as he knelt on the other side of the body. She touched Zabuza's cool chest while keeping an eye on the blonde. Naruto grinned. He said, "May I?" After a moment or two of hesitation, the shinobi nodded. With a bow of gratitude, Naruto touched Zabuza's neck with his fingers to check for a pulse. He waited for about a minute, his eyes steady and inquisitive. With a satisfied sigh, he finally withdrew. The teenager reported, his smile barely visible on his face, "He's dead." He got up and stepped back, returning to his team. After giving them a nod, the girl bent over and lifted Zabuza's body onto her shoulder. She disappeared in the wind, whispering, "Thanks for stalling him. I'll just be taking my leave." Sakura exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding a few moments after she had vanished. Kakashi sighed and squeezed some water out of his hair as Sasuke relaxed. Having already shouldered his pack and prepared to depart, he commanded, "Well, we might as well get going, late enough as it is." With a nod in agreement, the other two genin hurried to retrieve their belongings while maintaining a vigilant watch. However, Naruto remained motionless. He remained motionless, gazing thoughtfully at the location where the Anbu had been kneeling just a minute earlier. That voice reminded him of something from his past, and he knew he had recognized her. No matter how hard he searched his mind, he was unable to locate it. Despite his inability to come up with a solution, he was certain of one thing. Even he had fallen for the Anbu girl's convincing front until she committed a deadly error. The village head of leadership wants a dangerous rouge, and if an Anbu finds them, they are to be killed. And then, right where he was killed, dispose of the body. She only mentioned what she would be doing when she took him, which could open up a world of opportunities for her. She wasn't an Anbu. Zabuza had only been rendered nearly lifeless. He would return, shortly. After an hour or so, they had largely moved on from the incident and were focused on arriving at the port. Talk about multitasking. Kakashi was keeping a close watch while maintaining a conversation with the bridge builder. Sakura had received a long, silent apology from Sasuke, who was now repaying her by putting up with her chattiness. It appeared as though the poor boy wanted to shoot himself. In order to maintain the appearance that he was a weak genin, Naruto hung back quite a bit, acting as though he was exhausted from the recent battle. He was invisible and had his earpiece in, reporting to Itachi, his master. "Naruto's Itachi, how has the mission gone thus far?" Leisurely. Quite a shock when Zabuza showed up though. "Yes, I have heard that he was there just a few days ago. I had no idea that you would really run into him." "Yeah. I thought we had seen the last of him and his little partner all those years ago." "Well, I am positive that he isn't a big challenge. But, he knew about your plan. He almost exposed it." There was silence on the line. "Master? He must have been following us lately if he was aware of our little secret. Nobody else but you or I would be aware of my ambition, which could be problematic. Were the others informed?" "No, I attacked before he could say your name." "Excellent. I like it when you think on your toes." "Thank you, Master. Did you get rid of him?" "I was going to, but then an Anbu from the mist appeared, said they'd been after him for a while, and then she vanished." "Did she bring the body along?" "Yes. This proved the point that she was a fake, an impersonation. Whoever she really is, she must be with Zabuza in some way. What I want to know is how and why." "You're most likely correct. I don't doubt that she wasn't a real Anbu. Therefore, Zabuza might still be alive. It's still possible that he will reveal your secret. Don't let your guard down. Keep an eye out for him." "Of course. I'll search the surrounding area of the port once we get there." He was after the bridge. "Builder we're escorting. He's got to be somewhere around the town." "Excellent. And never forget to stay under the radar." "Anything, Master." The communication was lost as the line began to buzz. The port of Wave. When the team arrived, the main port of the Wave country was packed and noisy. Tazuna insisted that this was just the mid-afternoon bustle, but it felt like Konoha on vacation. He clarified that a long-awaited supply of food and goods arrived just that morning. For the locals, the arrival of a cargo ship was like a holiday because the quantity of imports had significantly decreased. "You have to get here pretty earlier now. Days to beat the mad rush of people. My daughter has had to get up before the crack of dawn sometimes just to get a good spot in line." Tazuna elaborated. Kakashi was taken aback by what he saw when he looked around. His words were, "There's barely anything left in the stands." Tazuna gave a serious nod. "It's been this way since Gato showed up. Making everything filter through his business. The taxes so expensive that people go bankrupt daily now. Our homeless rate had flown sky high in the past couple of months, making the city of trade the city of decay. We're falling apart from the inside out," he replied. He let out a deep sigh. "That's why we need the bridge." Naruto looked around, feeling a slight ache in his hard.to reach heart. People were huddled in corners everywhere, attempting to avoid the heat of the midday sun. Elderly people and young children, who were so small that they had not yet grown teeth, were trembling in alleyways and staring up at them with fatigue as they went by. Their eyes conveyed their inner emotions, such as hunger, exhaustion, and despair. Some of them were vacant, as though they were pleading with death to take them. A voice erupted from the bowels of a small bakery they were passing. "Get out, you street rat!" A young boy fell through the open door, hitting Naruto's feet with a forceful thud. The child's sad light blue eyes gazed up into the face of the person he had collided with. His face was covered in mud and grime, and his fair blonde hair hung over the tops of his eyebrows. The little boy backed away in a scared scamper, his eyes wide, as the older blonde knelt down. Naruto's smile was warm, sincere, and amiable. He took a loaf of bread out of the pocket of his backpack. He extended it for the boy to accept. The child's expression was cautious at first. Naruto gave a low laugh. He whispered, "Go on, take it. I don't want it anymore." The boy's face lit up instantly with the action, and he looked up with a faint smile. He swiftly devoured the bread after carefully tearing off a portion of it. Fortunately, his team hadn't noticed him stop, so Naruto smiled once more and looked around. Tazuna had mentioned that his daughter's home was located deep within the surrounding forest, but they had been lost in the crowds, most likely near the woods. Finding them wouldn't be a problem at all. The little child was gone when the blonde turned to look behind her. His gaze searched the streets around him. Then at last his eyes crossed a small alleyway across the street. With his other hand pointing toward Naruto, the young boy was guiding a woman with dark hair toward the opening. The woman nodded in gratitude and gave him a nice look. Naruto grinned as he stood. He then went in search of his team. The House of Tsunami. A while back, Team 7 had arrived at Tsunami's house and placed their belongings in the rooms that Tsunami had assigned them. The air was heavy with tension and anxiety as they sat in their living room. Sasuke stood with his onyx eyes downcast, leaning against a wall. Even Tsunami could see the anguish written in his face despite his casual and unconcerned manner. Kakashi was reading a book while seated in a little chair by the window. However, he would occasionally turn to face the window and look at every detail of the landscape before turning around. Sakura bit her fingernail as she sat at the foot of the couch. She let out a sigh. She said, "Maybe we should look for him." Kakashi just turned the page and shook his head. "I agree with Sakura. I mean, that Zabuza character seemed to have a thing with Naruto. What if he sniped him while we were walking through town? He was pretty far behind." Sasuke continued. With a sigh, Kakashi clasped his hands together and put the book back in his Junin vest. Kakashi promised, "Zabuza is dead to begin with, so we don't have to worry about him. And Naruto will show up. I trust him." Lie. The truth? Zabuza was alive, in the vicinity. Zabuza was only rendered nearly unconscious by the phony Anbu in order to trick any of them who insisted on taking a pulse. Astute, and illegal. Furthermore, Naruto wasn't entirely sure about his concept regarding the genin just yet. The fact that he appeared now, right before the graduation exams, greatly raised his suspicions. It might just be luck, of course. Then there was the fact that he lived alone for 7 years. A 5-year-old spending so much time caring for himself. Not likely. As well as his knowledge, strength, and skill. It was so amazing that even a Junin would have been envious. However, how did he obtain it? Alone. As likely as a 5-year-old living by themselves. In fact, he was still unsure of what to think. He was occasionally a contented, typical genin, laughing with his teammates and simply living his life. More often than not, though, he was alone, uninterested, and totally cut off from everyone. He found it strange that the teenager appeared to have 2 distinct personalities. He was only sure that the boy was working on something. He was going to discover what. Everyone was startled out of their reverie by a steady knock on the door, and their gazes were drawn to the spacious wooden entrance. The blonde they had been waiting for emerged as Tsunami walked over and swung open the door. He grinned a little. With an innocent expression, he said, "Hey, I'm looking for Team 7. I heard from my sensei that we'd be staying here." A warm, friendly smile replaced Tsunami's wary expression. She moved aside to allow the teenager to enter and replied, "Of course, they're right in here. They've been worried sick." With his hands in his pockets and his face completely hidden, Naruto entered the room. He gave a salute. "What goes on?" he asked quietly, his face lowered. Kakashi watched him steadily and only arched an eyebrow. Naruto sensed that the Junin was watching him closely. He simply lowered his head and pretended to be ashamed of what had transpired. Pushing himself off the wall, Sasuke moved toward the blonde's position. His eyes narrowed as he crossed his arms over his chest. With piercing onyx eyes, he asked simply, "An explanation?" Naruto gave a shrug. He reported, omitting his, act of kindness, "I got distracted. Looked up and you guys were gone. I remembered what Kakashi Sensei said about where we were staying and followed his instructions." The blonde glanced at Kakashi and saw that the man's eyes were not filled with faith. He clearly believed something was wrong. He had better leave this place. The teenager continued, heading for the back door. "Well, I'm off. I'll be in the woods in the back of the house if you need me." He walked through the kitchen and bowed to Tsunami, respectively. When he turned, he saw a small, black-haired child watching him from the hallway after sensing eyes on his back. The boy fled down the hallway as soon as he realized Naruto had seen him. With a small chuckle, Naruto bounded out the door and proceeded to venture far into the woods. In the heart of the woods, when Naruto sensed Kakashi's chakra signature coming into range, his hands were still smoking. Just as the Junin emerged from the tree line, he shook his hands rapidly, releasing the smoke. The man with silver hair sighed and tightened his jaw. As he approached the teenager, he said, "So, what were you really doing?" Naruto has just begun a taijutsu practice, and his movements are fluid. With his back to his sensei, he replied, "I told you. Got distracted." Kakashi laughed. The shinobi shot, accusingly, "The others may believe that, but I don't for a second. You're up to something, and it isn't good." Naruto turned, a smile of amusement spreading across his face. He asked naively, "What would I be up to? What could I, a little genin, do that could get you so worked up?" Kakashi let out a loud sigh. He was cunning, he'd admit. "I don't know, but what I do know is that you're not like regular genin." A frown took the place of Naruto's amused grin. With sorrowful cerulean eyes, he whispered, "You know, you're right. I'm not like Sakura or Sasuke at all." Kakashi grinned. He was losing it. Sasuke and Sakura weren't abandoned at birth, forced out into the world to care for themselves. They had parents to love them, keep them safe, said Naruto. Kakashi's triumphant smirk was completely erased. As the Junin retorted, Sasuke was left to fend for himself too. "You're not alone," Naruto sneered. The blonde responded, his rage blazing, "Yeah, at age 5. From day one, it was me against a village that hated me. They've tried to kill me for so long that I don't even know when it started," she said. Kakashi asked, "How do you think that?" The blonde spit out, "Because I've got scars that I don't even freaking remember." And started to pace the floor. "I fought for myself before Sasuke could even say, shinobi. And so help me for leaving. I saw sick of so many threats on my existence. And yeah, I happened to return at a convenient time. But might I say that it was exactly 7 years from that night was when I ran away. So maybe it was suspicious to some people, but it was planned for me." Naruto continued, his voice rising and reverberating through foliage. His anger was flowing through his body, and he was no longer even trying to hide it. Naruto's eyes were both sad and angry, and his breath came in ragged gasps. Kakashi was so taken aback by the spectacle he had just witnessed that he struggled to find the right words to say next. "So yeah, I'm happy and sad off and on throughout the day. But how would you feel, returning to the place where so many people put a bounty on your head? The place where your mother and father once stood, the place of your birth. I feel differently a lot, depending on what I'm reminded. I'm secluded, because I don't want to get hurt. I don't want them to know." Naruto continued, his tone fading. Kakashi's eyes softened as he released the deep breath he had been holding. "So, you know then?" the Junin asked in a low voice. Naruto laughed without amusement and nodded. The teenager remarked, "It's great to know that your hero placed this curse on you." The only sounds in the clearing were the birdsong and the wind in the trees. Kakashi let out a sigh. The man in the mask said, "You could try and trust people more. They might understand." "I do." Naruto gave a shrug. He answered, "I'm not one to take chances like that." His gaze fell to the floor. "But maybe I can. Try to open up." Kakashi grinned. Naruto's next words stopped him as he turned to go. "I was late because I ran into a little boy on the streets." Kakashi looked at the blonde as he turned once more. He was scared and hungry, so I gave him some of the bread in my bag. And then, well, I saw that he had a family. They were in a pretty bad position. I gave them some money for food and stuff. Kakashi grinned broadly and then vanished silently. Sakura, just a short while before, amidst the commotion near the house, the girl was lounging outside when she heard Naruto yell. Running as fast as she could, she nearly ran into her sensei's back. She flipped into a nearby bush and skidded to a stop, hiding herself just as Kakashi turned to go. But when the blonde in the clearing spoke again, he stopped. The teenager's face flushed slightly in embarrassment as he explained, "I was late because I ran into a little boy on the streets. He was scared and hungry, so I gave him some of the bread in my bag. And then, well, I saw that he had a family. They were in a pretty bad position. I gave them some money for food and stuff." Sakura noticed Kakashi grinning as he turned to leave. Naruto looked thoughtful as he watched his sensei leave. For a moment, Sakura believed he had seen her and decided it would be best to try to sneak away right away. The teen's next words stopped her in her tracks as she started to leave. "I wish I could, but I'm just too dangerous." The moon was just past its quarter state, and it was only a few minutes past midnight. The main port city of the wave was illuminated by the faint but brilliant light, which helped to break the silence in the night. The crests crashed against the wood of the docks and the sand as the ocean lashed at its shores with a soft lull down by the harbor. At this moment, the night's calm was disturbed by a loud crash, followed by a litany of obscenities. With a scowl on his face, a middle-aged man with unkempt black hair knelt down to examine the crate he had just dropped. From around the corner of a storehouse came another older man with angry eyes. Demanding, "What was that?" He rushed to the crouching figure. The man closest to the damaged cargo let out a sigh. Holding the splintered wood in his arms, he said, "I'm sorry, Tasuke, it slipped from my grasp." Tasuke let out a loud sigh. He whispered, "Be more careful, you oaf. Do you want Gado's thugs at our doorstep? What part of hidden don't you understand?" But as he looked around the harbor, his anger had given way to fear. The loader let out a sigh. He said it again, "I'm sorry," and hurried to a door on the storage wall that was slightly open. Tasuke tightened his jaw and ran his fingers through his hair. H worked hard and was a good man. However, the entire operation was put at risk by that one small error. Let's just say it wouldn't be pretty at all if Gado's thugs found out what they were doing. H, Tasuke, and roughly 24 other men were members of an unnamed group that clandestinely opposed Gado's reforms. They took in refugees who had also been fighting the little tyrant but had lost, and they bailed people out of their security cell near the store. Additionally, they sold illegally obtained goods for what Gado would consider theft. Tonight, they were doing precisely that. Unloading valuable cargo that should sustain the city until the bridge was finished from a ship that had arrived just 10 minutes earlier. A dark figure landed in front of Tasuke, crouching low to the ground, just as he turned to resume the backbreaking work that awaited him inside the storage house. The man was a good foot and a half taller than Tasuke when he reached his full height. The loader's eyes were wide and he staggered backwards a little in shock. Darkly, the figure gave a low, raspy laugh. He stepped toward Tasuke, who took a step back, and said, "Nice little party you have going on in there. Was I invited?" The figure laughed once more, making it clear that a smile was plastered on his face. "And would Gado know of your smuggled produce? I don't believe he would be very happy." The voice continued. He kicked over a couple of boxes that were stacked close to him just for good measure, causing the pile to topple and scatter apples and oranges across the floor. By this time, the workers inside had noticed the disturbance. When H saw what was happening, he gasped as a couple stuck their heads out the door. After ducking back inside, a large group of loaders with pipes and crowbars were pouring out the door in a matter of seconds. With a sly smile, the dark figure pulled a big sword from its sling on his back. He turned to face the first person who came up and muttered, "This will be fun." The instant his blade made contact with a crowbar, sparks flew. In a perfect position to go in for a kill, the figure flipped around and spun on his heel until he was behind his assailant. However, he didn't. He merely used the handle to knock him in the back, causing the man to collapse to the ground, unconscious. With a strong belief that he wouldn't kill them, a second and third opponent approached him. However, they were unaware of their error. Strangely enough, he did not extend the same leniency to the subsequent few that he did to the first. With a powerful swing to the right, he removed the loader's hand that had attempted to strike him in the head with a heavy metal pipe. With a cry of agony, the worker collapsed to the ground, holding the stub near his chest. The third had a deep, menacing gouge cut across the chest. It simply knocked the fourth and fifth aside, sending them both sprawling into the water 6 feet below. The seventh person nearly had his head cut off, but he dodged just in time to escape the fatal blow. Instead of getting clean out of the water, though, he was kicked in the head, sending him flying into the brick wall across from the fight. All of the courageous individuals who had confronted the enigmatic thug were either unconscious or in the bay within a minute. Tasuke was the only one left, kneeling on the ground close to the man who had been severely injured. With heavy footsteps that reverberated throughout the quiet alleyway, the figure started to approach him. With his sword gleaming lethal in the moonlight, the man spit out, "You must pay for your treachery. As all you heroes do." Sasuke waited for the agony of death to strike, tightly closing his eyes. The sound of metal cutting through the air reached his ears, and then nothing. For a few seconds, the loader's curiosity overcame his fear and he dared to open his eye a crack. But he gasped in surprise at what he saw. A boy with his back to him stood in front of him. He wore a dark crimson t-shirt to go with his black cargo pants. His chest was encircled by a black sash that extended from his right shoulder to his left. His raven hair was shaggy and stuck out in all directions. He was taking advantage of the fact that his arms were covered in black armor that extended from his wrist to his elbow, obstructing the man's massive blade. The first person frowned. "Standing in my way is never a good idea, especially if you're child," the man said. The sound of the boy's low growl was menacing. The teenager calmly shot back, his voice firm and assured, "Even as a child, I have more power than you would ever dream to have." Zabuza Momochi. Zabuza, the first shinobi, flinched in surprise but soon recovered his strength. From the boy's raised arm, he raised his big sword and slammed it into the ground, the tip digging a few inches into the ground. "How do you know my name?" Zabuza inquired in a genuinely surprised and bewildered tone. The teen's laughter was brief and spontaneous. The teenager responded sarcastically, his arrogance practically oozing from his words. "Tell me, Zabuza. Do you really believe that I would be so naive as to give out information? I would think someone as intelligent, and I use the word loosely, would know that." Zabuza paused, his body tense, as if he was going to attack the boy. With his teeth clenched in a rage, he spat, "Well, I see how it is. A tough guy with attitude." With the cold metal gleaming ferociously in the two eyes, he raised his blade once more. The teenager didn't wait for anything to happen, he took action. Before he knew it, he had Sasuke on the steps, grabbed his collar, and hurried to the storage door. The teenager firmly said, "Stay here." From a sheath strapped to his back, he pulled out a single katana. The blade was long, roughly 3/4 the length of his body. Black flames swirled in dancing patterns as they ascended from the base of the deep red metal. The engraved symbols on the gleaming gold hilt were too small for the loader to read from this distance. The thick, black leather covering the handle made it more difficult to remove than a regular material. After just a few seconds, Zabuza had figured out where they had disappeared to. With his sword at his side, he charged, rapidly approaching the teenager. The boy was only a few feet away when he suddenly acted and launched himself at the mist shinobi. He cut himself across the soldier as he flipped over his head and lashed outward. Gently landing on his feet, he launched another attack, slicing a deep gash across his back. Zabuza twisted wildly and grunted in pain as he attempted to strike the teenager who was harassing the affluent killer. The teenager leapt away and crouched about 7 feet off the ground on a wall. "Kaden Gukakyu no Jutsu," he exclaimed as he rose to his full height and performed a series of hand seals, bringing his fingers to his mouth. The mist shinobi was not to be outdone, though, as a huge raging fireball sped toward him. After quickly shaping his chakra, Zabuza said, "Suiryuden no Jutsu." When the fire and water collided, both attacks vanished in a cloud of steam, shrouding the air. This was Zabuza's ideal opportunity, and he quickly moved to the wall the boy had been standing on. However, he only arrived a second later, and when he looked up, he saw that he had disappeared. He scanned his surroundings, examining each shadow and silhouette in an attempt to find the unidentified but strong adolescent boy. His face was painfully smashed by the impact of a jarring blow to his back that sent him sprawling into the brick wall in front of him. Almost immediately, he took a step back, his hand flying to his broken nose. The teenager with the raven hair, however, was unrelenting. He whipped out once more, kicking Zabuza in the stomach this time, sending him flying skyward. With a quick flash, he rose above Zabuza's body. He slammed his heel into his back after flipping in a tight circle in midair. Zabuza hit the ground hard after spiraling down. Dust and pieces of debris were floating in the air around him, and his body left an indent in the cement. With his hand gripping his side and his eyes squeezed shut in agony, Zabuza stood shakily after peeling himself out of his ditch. A few feet from him, the boy landed, his face obscured by the darkness. Zabuza was having trouble breathing. He was still not fully recovered from the fight with the Konoha ninja 2 days prior. "Who are you?" inquired the mist shinobi. With a sly smile, the boy emerged from the shadows, exposing what he had been concealing for so long. The question was not at all addressed by the action. His eyes and left cheek were hidden behind a mask covering his face. The edge began on his right high cheekbone, traveled across his face and nose bridge, danced across his left cheek, and ended on the side of his jaw. The black side on the bottom and the red side on top of the mask were separated by a thin white line that ran down the middle of the mask. The teenager's smile was modest but arrogant, and his blood-red eyes gleamed brightly. He said, "They call me Fire Fox." Zabuza's eyes grew wide. He had heard a lot about the young man who was saving lives all over the 5 great nations. He was regarded as a living legend and a hero. He was only 13 years old. Zabuza smirked once more and looked at Tasuke, who was still sitting motionless by the storage house door, before he could speak to Firefox. With a nod, he raised his arm slowly, holding one kanji in front of his chest. He winked as he turned back to face Zabuza. Then it vanished in a flash of flame. The morning after, Tsunami sat down with a smile on her face and set another bowl of rice on the table. Reaching over, Sasuke grabbed it and added a third helping of the food to his plate. While Kakashi and Tazuna talked about the bridge's construction, Sakura was quietly discussing the town with Tsunami. Inari, Tsunami's son, was quietly picking at his food while keeping his eyes on the ground despite all of this chaos. The conversations were cut short by a loud crash toward the stairs. All of their eyes darted to the doorway, where Naruto submerged himself with his hand on his forehead. He grabbed a small bowl of rice and sat down heavily in a chair next to Sakura and across from Inari. Sasuke gave a subtle smirk and started to say something, but Naruto got ahead of him. With a bite in his mouth, he muttered, "Shut it." Sasuke grinned once more, but this time it was broader. "Did you fall down the stairs?" he asked, astonished. With a deep frown, Naruto got to his feet suddenly. He approached Sasuke, who was seated opposite him, holding his bowl. The rice spilled all over the raven-haired boy's head as he smirked and turned the bowl over. After entering the kitchen, the blonde put the now empty dish in the sink. He walked back outside and made his way to the rear entrance. Sasuke's onyx eyes, which were concealed by the subtle impassiveness that usually occupied them, were following the boy while he brushed wet rice particles out of his hair. Along with Naruto's external fatigue, his positive attitude had disappeared. He said, "I'll be out training." Then, with a start, he stumbled out the door and into the woods. Later that day in the market, with their arms full of bags containing a variety of goods, Sakura and Tazuna were making their way to the final store of the day. Kakashi had asked for wood, nails, clothing, medicine, and a few ninja tools. Their last destination was a bargain store that sold inexpensive food and dining utensils. The manager's eyes brightened as soon as they stepped through the door. A man at the counter was in the middle of making a purchase when he hurried over. He went up to Tazuna and whispered in the elderly man's ear something that could not be heard. After giving Sakura a list and some cash, Tazuna nodded to the clerk and followed him to a back room as his eyes grew wide. With a loud sigh, the man behind the counter slammed some bills onto the table, grabbed his bags, and hurried off. The girl with the pink hair wandered around the small shack, trying to find the things Tsunami had requested they purchase. Sakura knew some of them, while others were just plain strange. She was unable to even pronounce the names of a vegetable that twisted more than a pretzel and a fruit shaped like a star. Sakura would have been totally lost if Tsunami hadn't documented their appearance. The medic was just taking out the cash when Tazuna came out of the back room, followed by his friend. He grinned as he accepted the shinobi's payment and went back to his job at the register. With a grateful nod, Sakura followed the back of the fleeing bridge builder. His wrinkled face turned up in awe as she caught up to him, and he had a thoughtful expression. Says Sakura, "What is it, Tazuna?" With a sigh, the bridge builder combed through his gray hair. As if to conceal their conversation, he looked around and spoke softly. "Gato makes the price on all his merchandise triple of what they would be. It puts people in debt and causes them to go bankrupt. And that's if they can even afford it in the first place. Others go hungry night after night, and the death rate had rose a little every year since Gato moved into the port. So, a few months ago, a few people and I started an organization. One that resisted Gato's ideas secretly. The organization has greatly increased in members, reaching to about 30. But basically, we help people that are under Gato's hand of cruelty. It could range from taking in refugees that Gato's thugs are searching for or bringing in smuggled goods that we sell at a really low price. Like the store we were just in, it's run by my long-time friend. He's in the organization as well. Last night, a ship came in bearing a big load of supplies that would last us over until the bridge was finished. But while the loaders were storing in the warehouse, they were attacked by one of Gato's thugs. The same one that fought Naruto on the way here." He elaborated. Sakura's eyes widened as she abruptly stopped. Was Zabuza still alive? She believed that Anbo had killed him, but how could he have survived? And when would he launch his next attack if he were in the port here? Sakura cast a stealthy glance around, scanning the immediate surroundings for any possible dangers. But there wasn't a mist swordsman in sight, and everything was spotless. He beat all the loaders that came at them, though thankfully, none were killed. Gravely injured, yes, but alive at least. It was only the main leader of that night's cargo, Tasuke, that remained. We think Zabuza was sent to kill him and then destroy all the produce that had been shipped. But just as he was moving in to finish the job, a boy appeared. Sakura glanced up curiously. A boy? She was aware that the port lacked a ninja academy and even a group of shinobi to defend them. What youngster would dare, or be stupid enough, to face a proficient swordsman by himself? The boy, about your age I heard, fought with Zabuza for only a few minutes and beat him, easily by the looks of things. He had the man gasping for breath with only a couple of blows. When Zabuza asked him his name, he answered, but it was very peculiar. He said, "They call me Firefox." Dinner at Tsunami's house. Sakura chanted to herself, "He was here. He was actually here." But most of the people at the table could hear her. His face lit up in a tiny smile as he explained, "Yup." Tasuke said he said that and then vanished in a burst of fire. Zabuza disappeared immediately after that, probably going after the boy. Sakura gave a nod. Her face flushed with excitement as she cried out, "He beat him single-handed," and in only a matter of minutes, Sasuke laughed. He muttered, drawing a glare from the girl with the pink hair, "Please. He's just some hotshot trying to get the attention of big money payers. It's all about the reward for him, I can bet you. If he was really after the money, then don't you think he'd stick around after he saves people? He always disappears after the job's done. I can't think of a time where he's ever gotten a payment for the things he's done." She responded. Sasuke gave an eye roll. He took a sip of his water and insisted, "He's nothing more than a show." Off. Beside him, Naruto sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the table's wood and his face expressionless. Without anyone noticing, Sakura said, "He's a hero, a legend." And Naruto gave her a little smile in return. "He's incredibly strong, brave, and gracious. He's never killed a man no matter what the situation and has never asked for anything in return. A lot of people look up to him, admire him. Now tell me, Sasuke, what have been your accomplishments in life so far?" She yelled, slamming the Uchiha lifetime. There was silence in the room as Naruto chuckled uncontrollably in his head. A soft, laughing chuckle broke the calm. Tsunami's son, Inari, muttered under his breath, "There's no such thing as heroes." However, everyone could hear him just as clearly as if he had said it out loud. Naruto arched an eyebrow curiously. He remarked calmly, "Without heroes this world would be in complete chaos." Inari gave a snort. With the brim of his hat shading his eyes, he shot back, "If there were no heroes, bad guys would just leave us alone." The blonde, who was always up for a challenge, leaned forward. With a calm voice and an unimpressed expression, the teenager shot back, "If you really believe that, then you're not as smart as I thought." A grimace formed on Inari's jaw. His face blushing slightly with rage, he retorted, "Look who's talking. And besides, all heroes do is die anyways. What's so heroic about that?" Naruto clenched his jaw. This child was so annoying. To help the boy understand, the teen explained, "If they're dying for something important to them, then it doesn't matter what happens to them in the long run. As long as their important thing is safe, everything else is worthless, including their life." He was thick-headed, though. His eyes began to well up with tears as he remarked, "But they don't even think of how that would affect the people they're protecting, don't they put into account of what their important people would react when they die?" Naruto let out a long, frustrated sigh, but his subsequent remarks were gentle. Naruto's words were quiet and sincere, which is extremely unusual from the blonde. Of course they do. But that doesn't mean it's going to stop them. If their family is on the line and it's the choice between their death and yours, the answer is pretty obvious. Inari's eyes were hard and angry as he glared at the young teenager. "What would you know? You have a perfect life, surrounded by friends and a job you love doing. You wouldn't know that first thing about losing someone important to you. You don't even comprehend what it's like to be alone. You just don't know." Inari screamed, his rage burning brightly. Naruto changed the moment he said those words. His eyes, which usually had a hard, steely look, suddenly lost their warm expression. His fists clenched so firmly that 3 drops of blood were drawn from his palm by the fork he forgot he was holding. He jerked to his feet, slamming his hands against the table and dropping the silverware he was holding. His face was, for once, unmistakably angry as he pushed his hands into his jacket pockets and turned to leave. Sakura started to get up and called after him, "Naruto?" In a low, threatening voice, he replied, "Don't even." This was a clear warning to stay away. "But Naruto, please just." The boy interrupted, but his tone had changed from one of anger to one of, "Sakura, please. Just leave me alone." It was one of intense grief, and they could see that he had failed when he looked back, attempting to fix his gaze firmly. It was painful to look at him when his azure eyes were revealed for the first time. Like an ocean wave rushing over a powerful boat, the sheer anguish and sorrow radiating from him at that precise moment was overwhelming. And he left a silence thicker than wood as he left the room without saying another word. Woods, some distance from the home of Tsunami. Sitting on the edge of a tiny pond, the blonde gazed at his image in the glassy water. He carelessly tossed pebbles into the water, and the impact's ripples stirred his image, making it shaky and uneven, exactly like he was feeling inside at the moment. His body never moved, but his eyes flashed behind him as a gentle thud ripped him from his thoughts. The figure was only a few seconds away, and before long, Kakashi's hair was visible in the pond's surface. With a sigh, he sat down beside his student, his thoughts racing with possible things to say. He tried to start a conversation by opening his mouth multiple times, but he stopped when he realized it wasn't appropriate. At last, he made a straightforward statement. He silently questioned, observing the blonde intently as he attempted to decipher his behavior. "What happened back there? I've never seen so much raw emotion in your face." Naruto gave a shrug. With his eyes fixed solely on the ground, the teenager muttered, "Nothing, and it was a temporary slip-up. It won't happen again." Kakashi combed his hair and opened his mouth to say something, but Naruto interrupted. "Kakashi. Sensei, I thought about what you told me the other day, and I really do want to trust people. I just don't know how," the child admitted. Kakashi grinned. Perhaps they were finally making progress. "We'll get you started, like training with Sasuke and Sakura as a team. That'll help," he suggested. Naruto nodded and gave a small smile. When he looked back at the water, his eyes sparked. The blonde went on, "But first, I have a request." Kakashi gave him a curious look. There was a slight increase in Naruto's smile. "Can you teach me that walk on water thing?" As Team 7 was leaving Tsunami's house, the sun had just begun to peek over the horizon. They were going to a small area of extra-large trees about half a mile away in the forest directly to their right. As usual, Naruto trailed behind the others and was the last person out. In order to avoid waking the other members of the household, he quietly closed the door behind him. The blonde did not attempt to keep up with Sakura, Kakashi, and Sasuke as they approached the tree line. He would prefer to think alone because he has a lot to think about these days. As he entered the sunlight, the soft yet cozy radiance surrounded him with a feeling of calm. Knowing that moments like this didn't come around very often, he stopped and spent a few moments immersed in the sensation of security and safety. All of a sudden, he felt as though someone was staring into his back. His eyes darted around, taking in everything in sight. At last, his eyes fell upon the upper floor of the house, where Inari was watching him closely through his window. The young child's onyx eyes took on a glaring prospect as soon as he saw Naruto looking back. With a simple wave and a smile, Naruto left a bewildered young boy behind and headed for the woods. Woods. With his hands stuffed deep in his pockets, Naruto entered the clearing with composure. Kakashi smirked as he looked toward the boy. As usual, his tone was free and light as he said, "Glad you could join us." Naruto gave a shrug. The teenager, leaning against a tree trunk close to the other two who were seated on the ground, answered, "Got sidetracked." Each of the three wondered why they had been woken up so early as they looked up expectantly at their sensei. With a slight smile, Kakashi began his lesson. "It's obvious you all have some raw talent, but we need to start embellishing things you do know as to open up doorways for new knowledge. So we're going to start with a simple chakra control exercise." The Junin clarified. Sasuke arched an eyebrow in interest. The young Uchiha questioned, "What does coming out here have anything to do with it?" Without a word, Kakashi turned to the closest tree and began to walk up its trunk while holding only a finger. The grown man was idly climbing the big oak tree without using his hands, and all three genin leapt to their feet or leaned forward in surprise. He apparently had no fear of falling when he reached a high branch, perhaps 15 to 17 feet off the ground, and then he left. He produced 3 kunai from his back pocket and whipped them at the ground. At the genin's feet, they buried themselves a few inches deep. Focus your chakra into the soles of your feet, keeping a constant, even flow. If the flow's too hard, you'll blow yourself off, too light and you'll slide right off. Mark your progress with a single slash in the bark and try to get to the top, he advised. I'll be back in an hour to check up on your improvement. He then raised a hand and disappeared in a cloud of smoke after saying those final few words. So much for a sensei aboard. The three shinobi looked at each other. What other option did they have, though? Hey, he was at least returning this time. Sakura strode to a broad maple and took a knife from the ground. She poured her chakra into the soles of her feet while remaining motionless and with her eyes closed. She cautiously emerged a short while later, placing her right foot on the bark. After inhaling deeply, she positioned her left over the first. She waited for the sensation of falling and the ground hitting her, but she didn't get either. She had done it. She looked around and saw that she was suspended in mid-air. She moved forward one step at a time. Before long, she was traveling as quickly as she would on firm ground. In no time, the pinkhead was perched atop the tree's tallest branch. Sasuke came next. He followed Sakura's lead, but instead of going slowly, he got off to a fast start. Sadly, he didn't make it very far after flashing over to the base and beginning to climb. His body flew backwards as the bark beneath his foot smashed inward at about 3 paces up. Just before his head hit the ground, he flipped into an upright position and slashed out with his hand, slowing his skid. Ignoring the glare directed at him, Naruto laughed quietly. In a split second, he was sprinting toward the tree with focused cerulean eyes, adopting the basic stance. He referred to these control methods as a waste of time, having never learned them from Itachi. When you can jump straight to the things that really matter, why spend years learning the fundamentals? However, Naruto occasionally failed to notice that he never attended a real school and did not acquire the same knowledge as everyone else. He might be able to defeat a swarm of Anbu by himself, but he would fail a quiz that asked him to describe the chakra system with ease. He wished he knew things like these because you never know when they might be useful. The blonde managed to climb the trunk quite a distance, perhaps 7 feet. Suddenly, however, his feet came away. He cast a startled glance down, swung the kunai, and began to plummet quickly to the ground. He finished with a sophisticated back hand spring, saving himself a foot above the hard, packed ground. As the teenager tilted his head and gazed up at the mark he had made, Sasuke grinned smugly. It was a long way from Sakura's, but it was also much higher than Sasuke's. His jaw tightened. Itachi, you're not cooperating with him on this. How in the world is he able to perform forbidden jutsu if he couldn't even climb a tree 10 feet? He was clearly going to put a lot of effort into this. Perhaps if he did, his attacks would get stronger and have more applications. With a smirk that was almost a smile, Sasuke muttered, looks like the hotshot isn't so great after all. Naruto let out a loud sigh and looked at him, his face unreadable. He backed up for another attempt and muttered, shut it. My training never covered this. Frowning, he attempted to make it another foot and a half above his initial mark before slipping. He reached out and grabbed a nearby limb as he fell. He leapt back up to another branch close to the mark and landed stealthily after swinging himself up. His eyes darted from the top of the slash to the scratch he had made, studying it carefully. Even though Sasuke had no idea what the blonde was doing, he wasn't going to let the rookie get ahead of him once more. He followed Naruto's example, charging hard and swiftly at the tree, launching himself high up the trunk. Before he was backfired once more, he had advanced 5 feet past his prior line. He noticed that his recently made flag was higher than Naruto's most recent one. He prepared for what he believed to be his final attempt with a satisfied smile. Naruto was at his starting line again when his eyes suddenly sparked and he flashed to the ground. He rapidly performed the calculations in his head once more, and then, nodding his head, he began at the tree once more, this time moving much more slowly. Around his feet, blue chakra flashed and then vanished in a flash, until the trickle became a steady flow. With a steady ascent, Naruto passed his first mark, then his second, and finally reached the top, where he flipped onto the highest branch. His eyes glistened with laughter as he waved and grinned down at Sasuke. The Uchiha frowned. He had triumphed once more. Later, all three had at least made up at least twice in the 30 minutes after Kakashi's disappearance, but the Uchiha felt he needed to regain his pride in something. Because he had been working on climbing the forest's tallest tree, which is about 75 feet high, for the last 10 minutes. As they waited for Kakashi to return, Sakura and Naruto sat close to its base and watched him perspire. Sitting next to the blonde teenager by herself made Sakura uneasy. He was just very quiet most of the time, but she didn't mind him at all. She had no information about him. She was about to attempt to strike up a conversation when Naruto outsmarted her. He looked thoughtfully into space and said softly, "Hey Sakura, could I talk to you for a second?" Sakura gave a quiet smile. "Of course," was her reply. After a few moments of silence, Naruto turned to her and sighed. "All the genin back home, you all seem to be great friends," he replied. Sakura grinned more broadly. We are. I've known all of them since we were little, even before the academy, she replied. With the action, Naruto's brow furrowed in a slight frown. The blonde remarked, what about you and that Ino girl? You two seem to have your issues. Sakura gave a slight grimace. Ino was always a difficult topic. The pink-haired girl said, I met her when I was a little over 5. I'd been bullied a lot because I have a pretty big forehead. Her hand instinctively went to her hairline. Ino defended me, took my side and told the bullies off. It was then that we became the best of friends. It was only a few months after we started the academy that we both began developing crushes for Sasuke. Our friendship grew strained. It wasn't easy having a best friend like the same guy you did. One day, Ino told me that Sasuke liked girls with long hair. So naturally, both of us grew it out. After that things we never the same. Sakura clarified. With his eyes fixed on the medic, Naruto nodded. Sakura inhaled deeply, feeling her chest constrict with emotion, but she forced herself to swallow. Her voice grew quiet as she went on. I still can't believe we aren't friends because of something so, I don't know. Petty? Asked Naruto. Sakura gave a shrug. She answered, it's hard to explain. With a sigh, Naruto leaned back against the tree. His sapphire eyes were calm and gentle as he asked, and what about the whole Sasuke attacking you thing? Are you okay on that? Sakura sat motionless for a few seconds before turning to face Sasuke, who was a short distance away, about 3 meters up the tree. I was scared. I tried to act like everything was okay, you know, like talking to him as I usually would. But it hasn't been the same. I don't know why, but I don't see him in the same light anymore. I still like him, but not as much. I forgive him, but it will never be the same again. She elaborated. With his chin in the palm of his hand, Naruto listened and nodded. Sakura's soft emerald eyes met his. She said, why do you ask? Naruto gave a shrug. With a quiet voice, the blonde replied, I was just curious about how you managed to trust people because I've always had trouble doing so. She glanced at the dark-haired teen and whispered, well, you can always count on your teammates. We're the closest thing to a family out here on the road, which is where we'll be most of our lives. And even though Sasuke is hard-headed on the outside, I'm sure he cares. At least, I think. You can never tell with him, but since you got here, he's been better than in the past. Naruto raised his eyebrows. Really? What happened to him to make him act like he's gotta stick up his ass? Asked the shinobi. Sakura merely drew at the grass close to her feet and shook her head. It's not my story to tell, you'd have to ask him, she said. She felt that someone didn't want her to share that story with Naruto, but she couldn't pinpoint why. She felt as though an unidentified person was staring intently into her back and creating a hole there. She turned, looking into the upper part of the trees and into the shadows. She thought they weren't alone, though, even though she didn't see anything. Almost immediately, Naruto saw Sakura stiffen and scan the area for something invisible. He nearly followed suit, but something else caught his eye. Kakashi had come back. He entered the clearing, where he could see Sakura and Naruto next to the big river birch. Before he could ask a question, Sasuke landed between the three, his body slamming into the ground. He leapt to his feet and looked directly at the man, as though nothing had happened. He walked silently in the direction of the house, murmuring, took you long enough. The other two shinobi just shrugged when Kakashi turned to look at them. The Junin let out a sigh. Following Sasuke's quick retreat, the man sighed and said, well, we were going to work on some other chakra techniques, but I guess we could take a break for lunch. After exchanging glances, Sakura and Naruto hurried to stand up in an attempt to catch up to their leaving companions. As they strolled through the trees, Naruto's eyes were fixed on the ground and he said, oh, and by the way, I don't think you have a big forehead. The Kunoichi blushed a light shade of pink and grinned, turning her head away to hide the impact of the words. In response, she muttered, thanks. The hairs on the back of Naruto's neck stood on end the moment he grinned. Someone's angry, betrayed gaze seemed to be watching him. He cast a quick glance behind him, looking for someone hiding in the forest, looking for their chakra signature. However, there was no sign of anyone else. Other than them, no one had been in this area for some time. Sakura turned back as the blonde waited for him to catch up. It was probably his imagination, whatever it was. Not at all significant. How mistaken he was.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.